Welcome to the December 13th meeting of the Glendale City Council. Roll call, please.
Council members Garpetian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Sinanian.
Here.
Mayor Devine.
Thank you. Next, here.
Next will be the flag salute delivered by Council member Sinanian, followed by the invocation. Please rise. Allegiance to our nation.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for this evening's invocation. On December 24th, 1941, Prime Minister Winston Churchill visited the U.S. just weeks after the deadly attack on Pearl Harbor. He was discussing plans of war with President Roosevelt and while in D.C. attended the national lighting of our Christmas tree and had a chance to address our nation. In his address, he spoke of the attacks and noted that, quote, almost the whole world is locked in deadly struggle, and with the most terrible weapons which science can devise, the nations advance upon each other, end quote. But he asked everyone to also take a moment to pause and, quote, let the children have their night of fun and laughter. Let the gifts of Father Christmas delight their play. Let us grown-ups share to the full in their unstinted pleasures before we turn against the stern task of formidable years that lie before us. Resolved, and by our sacrifice and daring, these same children shall not be robbed of their inheritance, nor denied their right to live in a free and decent world. This evening we have our last meeting of the year and look to the challenges that the new year will bring us. Our thoughts may weigh heavy with the future of our country, our men and women serving in our military overseas, our families and their safety and well-being here at home. But through it all, we should pause and enjoy this holiday season, praying for the well-being of all, goodwill towards all who seek harmony, and who work to make our city, our state, our nation a better place for the next generation. Above all, we pray for prosperity in our jewel city and peace around the world, tonight and always. Amen.
Amen.
And what's next?
The agenda for the December 13, 2016 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Friday, December 9, 2016 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item.
Presentation and appointments. At 3A is the agenda preview for the meetings of Tuesday, December 20th, 2016. Madam Mayor and Council, the meetings of December 20th, December 27th, 2016, January 3rd, and January 10, 2017. Both the Council and Housing Authority meetings have been canceled for those dates. There will be special meetings which will be held on January 7th, 2017, and the next regular meetings of the Council and other bodies are scheduled for January 24th, 2017.
Thank you.
The 10th is gone too?
10th is gone.
As of now, there's a potential lack of quorum. Yes.
Oh.
So we will likely have to come back on the 17th and do a special afternoon meeting.
That will
okay
be
with you,
in
Mr.
your neighborhood?
Carpenter?
Yes, sir.
In your
Ma'am.
neighborhood on the
Yeah.
17th.
A special meeting if you like, sir.
No, I know there was
Next,
discussion about
Yeah.
missing a lot of meetings and okay.
Next item.
Next item is the consent calendar, including meetings. The following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of the council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed.
Are there any requests for pooling an item?
I'll move the consent calendar.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes. Next item.
Next item is the City Council and staff comments.
Okay. Comments? Gentlemen?
Yes,
Mr.
Madam Mayor.
Garpetian.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity and wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Holidays. Also, for the year coming, 2016, I'd like to really, for us to concentrate on Civic Auditorium as well and the master plan for it. I think it's a jewel, one of the jewels of our city, and I'd like to see that coming back sooner than later if possible, the master planning of it and putting it to a good use. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Sure.
Mr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I would also like to congratulate everyone on the upcoming holidays. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, whatever it is that you celebrate. Be merry and spend it with your loved ones. Also want to congratulate Councilman Garpetian. It's his birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, he's
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
So, thank you. And thank you. And I want to get I don't know if I need a second for fellow council members, but agendize the issue of the Maryland closure, Paseo, whatever the current status is, and where do we move from there? Because I think our programming is going to expire through at the end of the year. So it's up in one way or another, and the big question is looming: what are we doing there? My vision has always been a real, full-on promenade for our residents. But again, that's subject of the hearing that hopefully we'll have coming soon.
In January, we'll schedule.
January. Okay, very well. That's all I have, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take this. Mr. Najarian, I was going to congratulate you. Councilmember Najarian was just elected to another 4-year term on the Metro Board, so congratulations.
Well, thank you.
I think. Oh.
It's not that easy. So I was nominated by the sector, so there remains to be an election in January for that. But thank you for your support.
You're quite welcome. And that's it. What's the next item, please?
Next item is community event announcements, as well as the 3-minute oral communications portion, which is reserved for individuals who forego the 5-minute oral communications to speak earlier in the meeting.
Okay, I have 2 cards. First is John Kosiamba. Did I say that right, John?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Most of you know me. I'm here to speak about the recent meetings for the Dorn CPUC crossing improvements. The new regime apparently has held meetings about the grade separations again, and they've made a decision on the fly there at the meeting that goes against the judge's ruling in the previous decisions, for the CPUC judge, to not have the Dorn crossing have an interim improvement of one-way in. Now, Ara, at the previous Metro meeting where the grade separations were approved 2 years ago, I believe it was, that it included Dorn Street interim improvements until the grade separations were completed. They had a PAC meeting there. It was all the business district from Atwater. There was no Glendale businessmen there. There was very few Glendale residents there. They did not do any outreach to Glendale and Glendale residents, as far as I can tell. They just rolled over whatever and said, fine, we're not going to make Dorn one way. It'll remain two-way. It'll remain exactly as it is until the grade separations are done. Very unsafe, against the judge's ruling. I want the city of Glendale to be against this, as, of course, the Pelanconi HOA is against it, too. And I don't know what else I can say about getting this done, but any questions?
Questions?
No, we can't. Technically, we can't do questions.
Thank Ara and Paula, thank you for being there, and Scott, thank you for showing up, too.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask
Comments?
staff questions.
Okay. We'll just
We
do a
get a
couple briefly.
brief report on
just
this?
briefly.
Yeah, we had the meeting. I think the takeaway for us was this is probably the first time, it is the first time, that the city was an active participant in these discussions. Previously, I think Metro staff had moved forward kind of unilaterally, and the city had pulled back because we were unsatisfied with the collaboration, or at least their consideration of what was going to happen in that corridor. At this point, what the Metro folks are presenting is this notion of this J-hook that will come off, so to speak, comes off of the Fairmont flyover, connects underneath the 134 across the wash, and connects to the Atwater Business District for one point of access. And then a second point of access would be an overpass, effectively, at Sperry-Salem, Broadway, just north of Broadway, Brazil. And the idea there is to seal off the corridor so that there are no grade separations. I'd have to defer to the folks at Metro with respect to the interim improvements I think Mr. Kosiamba is referring to. What I had heard the Metro folks talk about is that they don't intend to do the interim improvements until they understand whether or not the project is in fact going to move forward. And what will trigger the project moving forward will be the support of the city of Glendale for the sealed corridor. So if you're able to do away with the crossing, both ingress and egress at Dorn because of the problems foreseen by Metrolink, by the CPUC, and also have a plan for what happens at the Sperry-Salem separation, one, we can get to a point where it's a safer corridor because there aren't those crossings, and two, it's a quieter corridor, so that way you can have the wayside horns as opposed to the blaring horns that come through as trains are moving on. But they didn't want to commit to those improvements, notwithstanding the judges, the CPUC judges' ruling, until they knew exactly what they were going to do with respect to Dorn. I think that maybe is the subtle difference. And from what I took away from the meeting, I was at the afternoon, and we had staff there in the evening, was that they were looking for consensus on it was going to be either a J-hook or a P-hook, or there were some other considerations with respect to protecting Pelanconi neighborhoods as well as Rancho neighborhoods from truck traffic that could otherwise enter along Fairmont trying to get to what's the name of the street? It's a southbound street that gets you back to the 134 freeway. Concord.
Oh, Concord.
Concord.
Fairmont and Concord.
Concord, and to make sure that is all that the concerns of the neighbors, which seems to be truck traffic by and large, is understood. So the interim improvements are going to be forthcoming, but Metro doesn't want to necessarily commit to them until they know that there is consensus, particularly from LA and Atwater and City of Glendale, on the P-hook, J-hook type solution, as well as the weight limitations for trucks.
If I'm not correct, or I believe these were already approved by Metro 2 years ago, and they also stated that in the meeting that the grade separations were approved 2 years ago.
Thank you, John.
Well, I don't want to prolong it. I know the city attorney.
Well, I don't want it to be a discussion between the school and the council.
But your point is well taken regarding the interim improvements, and there's funding issues also at hand, and we will be getting back to you with...
They have $3 million available now that could do the interim improvements, plus for the fact that they're going to wait. It would be 2020 before anything gets completed, if then, because it didn't get completed in 2016 like it was supposed to. So, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Huarchanian.
I'm very sorry, I will speak in Armenian. Is possible?
Sure.
Comment 6.
Բարի երեկո ձեզ, հարգելի տիկին քաղաքապետ, հարգելի քաղաքապետանի փոխանցումներ։ Իմ անունը Ռոբերտ Հարությունյանն է, ես ինքս տնտեսագիտության դոկտոր եմ, գրող հրապարակող։ Վերջերս ես ստացել եմ բնակարան նորակառույց շենքում Glendale, որի համար շատ շնորհակալ եմ քաղաքապետարանին։ Բայց այդ ուրախությունը մտագնեց մի փոքր փաստով, որի մասին ես ում ձեզ հետ կիսվեմ, որը շատ կարևորում եմ, որը առնչվում է ոչ իմ կոնկրետ անձի հետ, այլ ընդհանրապես ցանկացած այս քաղաքի ապրող բնակչի, ով վարձակալում է։ Դա կապված է վարձակալության դեպոզիտի հետ կապված։ Այսինքն եւ ես արդեն հանձնեցի բնակարանը եւ արդեն դուրս եմ գալի։ Ես ուզեցա տեղեկանալ ինչ գումար է ինձ վերադարձնելու նախկին տանտերը։ Ասկեն երբ ես հանձնեցի բանալի։ Նախկինում ես շատ մաքուր միշտ վարձակալել եմ եւ հանձնել եմ բնակարանը լրիվ 100% վիճակում եւ ստացել եմ լրիվ իմ ներդրած, այսպես ասած, դեպոզիտը։ Կարող եք այդ արդյունությամբ եւ այդ փաստը կարող եմ ես ներկայացնել նախկին վարձակալության դեպքում։ Այս դեպքում նա առարկություն ունեցավ եւ ես իրեն ասենք թե թողել է դեպոզիտ $1250, նա գտավ նպատակահարմար ինձ վերադարձնել ընդամենը $400։ Հետո մի փոքր խոսակցության հետո կին առաջարկեց լավ $100 կտա։ Ես չեմ ուզում առնչությունների հետ մանրամասնությունների վրա ձեր ժամանակը կորցնեմ, ես ուզում եմ իմանալ մի փաստ։ Վերաբերբունքը, ասինքն հարաբերությունները տիրոջ եւ վարձակալի միջև։ Ես ինչքանով ես հասկացել եմ, ես զրուցել եմ housing department-ի տնօրենի հետ։ Չի կարգավորված։ Ինչու քաղաքացին պետք է բանի, այսպես ասած, տան տիրոջ հետ առողջություններ ունենա այդ դեպոզիտի հետ կապված։ Սա կարևոր խնդիր է, պետք է սա կարգավորված լինի city կողմից։ Բոլոր մանրամասնությունը, երբ որ ես մուտք եմ գործում բնակարան, ես տորագրություն եմ տալիս, որ ամեն ինչ կարգին է։ Երբ որ ես դուրս եմ գալի բնակարից, մեկը չգա city-ից, որ նայի ասի, այստեղ լավ է կամ վատ է, արձանագրի, որ այդ հարաբերությունները թե տանտերը եւ քաղաքացին ինչպիսի հարաբերությունների մեջ պետք է լինեն։ Կարգավորվի օրենքով։ Թե չի հիմա ես ասում եմ, դուք միասին պետք է որոշեք։ Տանտերն ասում է, դու սխալ ես կամ իմ տունս, այսպես ասած, այնքան է մաքուր չի կամ սենց։ Վարչակալը իր կարծիքն է հայտնում։ Ես հիմա չեմ ուզում մեր մանրամասնությունների մեջ մտնեմ, սա կարևոր խնդիր է, դա միայն ինչ չի առնչվում, շատերին է առնչվում, մարդիկ լեզու չունեն, որ արտահայտեն, չեն գալիս, բողոքելու բան չեն ասում, բայց հազարավոր մարդիկ տուժում են։ Հաշվի առեք, որ վարչակալը միշտ տուժված մարդ է։ Ես չգիտեմ դուք վիճակագրություն տանում եք, թե չէ, sorry, միայն մի հատ, 1 minute, որ վարչակալը իր աշխատավարձի որ գումարն է ներդրում տան վարչակալության համար, իմ առողջության մեջ 50%-ից ավելն եմ ներդրել։ Անես որ դա ինձ համար մեծ գումար է, ես չեմ ուզում այդ գումարը կորցնեմ։ Խնդրում ես հարցին կարգավորում տվեք, եթե կարիքը կա, ես պատրաստ եմ եւ իմ վոլոնտիրները շատ կլինեն։ Գանք եք հարցին օրենսդրական բան տանք, կարգավորում։ Քաղաքապետարանի մակարդակով, եթե պետք է Լոս Անջելես Սիթի մակարդակով, որ այս հարցը առնչությունը տանտեր եւ տենանտ պետք է վերջնական լուծված լինի, մեկը պետք է գա եւ վերահսկի։ Կլինեն վոլոնտիրներ, կլինեն թե ուրիշ մարդիկ, արդեն մենք եկեք որոշենք։ Thank you.
Thank you. And well, we're going to thank you. That ends oral communication. We're going to skip over our action items, and well, let's do the adoption of ordinance first before we move on. We're going to take the items out of order and go directly to the hearing after this ordinance adoption. So, Mr. Kisaki.
Under adoption of ordinance, the 7A ordinance for authorizing the execution of the wireless communications facility lease agreement between the City of Glendale and Los Angeles Limited Partnership, DBA Verizon Wireless at Babe Herman Little League Field. This was brought forth by Councilmember Najarian on December 6, 2016.
Do I have a motion for the comments?
Madam Mayor, I appreciated the comments by at least one of my colleagues last week, but I do believe that if this location is denied, it may lead to a merry-go-round of location and siting searches and investigations that may very well have a greater impact than what they currently have. So I would move the item at 7A1.
Before I second that motion, I do want to ask staff, the location of this tower, is it extraordinary in the sense that other towers are not located next to parks or other venues that are attended by children or a large number of people?
No, I would say that it isn't extraordinary. When you look at...
It's not, you said.
It is not extraordinary. So we have towers at Pelanconi Park, at Stengel Ball Field right across the street, at the Babe Herman Field, of course, and at Fremont Park, let alone the larger installations that we have at the Shoal ball fields and the sports complex. But those first four are the ones that are kind of tucked away into our residential neighborhoods. And the idea, as was mentioned, is trying to get co-location because as we've been preempted by the federal government in the context of telecommunications installations, what we have endeavored to do is push the locations into, or push the installations to co-locate so there's not a proliferation into the residential neighborhoods. And many times they will end up in parks, sometimes on monopoles, sometimes on flagpoles, sometimes on lights. And so this really is in my view, not unique from what we've seen in other places.
Well, if I may, Madam Mayor, just for the record, most of our towers are in Shoal and Sports Complex. Fremont Park was approved last year, which I voted against it. It's in the residential neighborhood. And Stengel Park, it's not adjacent to residential neighborhoods. It's adjacent to basically right up against the Wash and Verdugo Road. And yes, it's next to maybe the parking lots that leads to Verdugo Park. But this one particularly is in a middle of residential neighborhood, next to an elementary school, and Babe Herman Park, if you go every day, and you can see that it's used by children age of 4 to 12. So that's all I have to say, and that's why I'm going to vote against it.
So I'll second the motion. Yeah.
Roll call, please.
Council members Garpetian,
No.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes. Okay, so we'll go to
9A.
We'll go to 9A. Read that item, please, into the...
9A is Director of, it's a hearing, and it is Director of Community Development regarding 126, 128, and 1325 Kenwood Street, Stage 1 and 2 Design Review. 9A1 is a resolution certifying final environmental impact report. 2 is a motion approving Stage 1 and 2 design. 3 is a motion approving instrument imposing covenants on real property.
Thank you. So I will open the hearing at this point and go to Mr. Choa.
Yes, ma'am.
And staff.
We will present this item to you, and then as you preside over the public hearing, we'll try to answer any questions for you and for the council. This is a project that is technically in the DSP, which is why you serve as the design review for the Stage 1, Stage 2. There was some discussion, I'm sure Ms. Zematitis will get into the EIR that is here before you and why it is required, and the discussion generally about the historic significance or not of the subject site. So with that, no further ado, Vilia will give you an overview of the project.
Madam Mayor, council members, thank you. As just was mentioned, this is a mixed multifamily residential project located at 126, 128, and 132 South Kenwood. As noted, the property is located in the downtown Pacific Plan area in the heart of the East Broadway district, located mid-block on Kenwood, south of Broadway, north of Harvard. Here you have before you an aerial image outlining the project site, which is composed of 3 parcels. The first being 126 South Kenwood, which is a vacant lot. 128 South Kenwood, which features a 1920s craftsman single-family residential home, and 132 South Kenwood, which features a craftsman home at the front and a duplex above the garage at the rear. Looking across the street is a 9-story senior project. To the far north, there is the 416 mixed-use project, 416 Broadway being the first mixed-use development in the downtown area, 4 stories. Directly north of the project site, there is a 5-story multifamily residential condominium building, and directly to the south, there are 2-story multifamily residential low-scale projects. Here you just have in front of you a few streetscape images to orient yourselves. This would be the view looking south on Kenwood. This would be the project site outlined in the yellow oval. And before you on the far right-hand side, you'll notice the 9-story senior project. And next to the project site is the 5-story condominium project. The view looking north on Kenwood. And again, the single-family residential homes that are to be demolished as part of the project outlined in the oval. And this is the view looking towards the project site with the adjacent multifamily residential condominium tower, or building in this case. Now, the Downtown Pacific Plan East Broadway District allows by right multifamily residential development, 4 stories, 65 feet. Through the Downtown Pacific Plan incentives item, that you are allowed in exchange for providing additional public benefits such as additional publicly accessible open space, a hotel project, some other incentives as outlined in the DSP. In exchange for those public benefits, you are allowed to then request additional height and floor area ratio. With incentives in the East Broadway district, they can go up to a maximum of 5 stories, 80 feet in height. And the permitted density by right is 2.5, which again, this would be the floor area ratio, the amount of floor area divided by the lot area, which with an incentive can go all the way up to 2.75. This particular project is requesting an incentive by providing additional publicly accessible open space, and they are requesting 5 stories, 69.5 feet, and an FAR of 2.75. The image before you is a perspective drawing showing what the building would look like if you were standing across the street on Kenwood looking towards the project site. And you'll notice it's a contemporary building, 5 stories. Again, these are 44 residential units. These are condominium units. They're for sale, not apartments. And the project includes 89 parking spaces, so it does comply with our parking standards. They are providing spaces, all the required spaces for on-site residents as well as guest parking. The site plan itself is a U-shaped building that features a main courtyard that is open to the north. This would be facing the adjacent 5-story multifamily condominium building. And the first floor, which again you'll see on the screen as noted, the courtyard that's outlined in orange, which is rather ample space. The project also includes interior amenities such as a gym and a bonus room. Access is provided to the 2 subterranean levels of parking from the alley only. So there are no driveways proposed along Kenwood, so all of the access would be taken off the 2-way driveway at the rear. And there is a buffer that is provided on the along the south property line. Again, this would be adjacent to the low-scale 2-story multifamily residential projects that front Harvard. So the garages actually for those projects are the ones that are abutting the project site. The project complies with all of the, the development standards for the Downtown Specific Plan East Broadway District, and that would include open space. The open space is provided in terms of a combination of common open space areas, private open space areas in terms of the balconies, and then also publicly accessible open space. Now, per the Downtown Specific Plan, each project must provide a minimum of 5% publicly accessible open space. Because the project is providing above and beyond what is required by code in the DSP, they are requesting the additional open space. And for every 1 square foot of open space above the minimum, they are allowed to request 10 additional square feet of floor area. So in this case, the project would be required by code to be providing 10% of the gross floor area plus 140 square feet per unit for, again, this would be on the second to the last row. They're required to provide 8,410 square feet. The project itself is providing approximately 9,800. And in terms of the publicly accessible open space, the project would be required to provide by code 1,125 square feet. And the project is providing 1,600 or 1,688. So they are providing an additional 563 square feet of open space, more than half of, or 50%. This additional publicly accessible open space, as noted on the previous slide, is provided along the south property line, abutting the adjacent low-rise residential. The publicly accessible open space is 20 feet wide along Kenwood for a depth of 31 feet 9 inches, and then it narrows down to 11 feet and spans all along the southerly property line. In this area, they're providing passive seating area, shade trees, a water feature. This area is specifically meant for the neighboring residents for passive seating, to congregate and whatnot. It will have to comply with the development standards set forth in the DSP. So there are specific additional open space standards, as mentioned in the incentives chapter of the DSP, and those criteria and guidelines were outlined in the design memo that was attached to your staff report. Again, this is just highlighting actually the perspective drawings of what the additional publicly accessible open space would look like. Again, the contemporary project has been found to be consistent with the Downtown Specific Plan's East Broadway District standards and guidelines, and those were very detailed in the design memo that was included and prepared by staff. The project was originally slated to be presented to you on March 29th of this year, and it was presented with as an exemption per the California Environmental Quality Act as a Class 32, an infill development project exemption. The item was actually taken off the calendar in order to prepare an environmental impact report which specifically focused on cultural resources, and this would be in regards to the demolition or the proposed demolition of the 2 Craftsman homes located at 128 and 132 South Kenwood. The draft EIR was prepared by Meridian Consulting along with staff's review, and the draft was circulated for a 30-day comment period starting on October 20th through November 21st. Based on the historic resource assessment, and this was prepared by Arroyo Associates and dated October 11th, 2016, and this assessment was included as part of the draft EIR. The draft EIR determined that the 2 existing Craftsman residences and the minimal traditional duplex, which is above the garage at 132 South Kenwood, did not meet the criteria of the Glendale Register of Historic Resources or the California Register of Historical Resources, and that the existing structures did not meet the definition of a historical resource or historically significant property under the California Environmental Quality Acts. So the potential impacts from the proposed demolition of these 2 Craftsman structures and the duplex above were considered to be less than significant. During the 30-day review period, 2 letters were received. One was from Abundant Housing, which specifically stated their support of the proposed multifamily residential condominium project. The other came from the Glendale Historic Society. The letter from the Glendale Historic Society challenged 3 main points. One would be the adequacy of the Historic Resources Technical Report. This would be the report that was prepared for the draft EIR by Arroyo Associates. Second item was that they questioned or challenged the determination that the 2 existing residences are not historic under the CEQA. And last, because the ultimate determination was that the demolition was considered not to be a significant impact, there were alternatives presented as part of the draft EIR, and so they questioned the fact that since the structures were considered not to be historic, that the proposed project alternatives also were being questioned. So the final EIR, which was included as part of your staff report, specifically addressed in response to comments these 2 letters, and essentially the Glendale Historical Society letter, and detailed outlined in regards point by point the points that were made in the letter itself received from the Glendale Historical Society. And there was no new evidence based on the analysis, and so essentially there was no change in the conclusion of the draft EIR, that the demolition of the proposed demolition of the historic, in this case not historic, residences were considered to be less than significant. So before you have staff's recommendation, and just before I go into the fact that staff is recommending certifying the final EIR and approving the stage 1 and 2 design review submission, would be that we have received additional letters since the staff report went online. Those letters were distributed to you today, which would include letters from the Glendale Historical Society, Mr. Michael Morgan, Patty Shilvershire, Abe Kashifs, and Uda Baum, and Rondi Warner. These would be letters in opposition to the project, as well as 2 letters in support, one from Abundant Housing LA and one from Gary Umbart, who lives in the condominium project next door. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Should we move on to the developer, or okay? Or the?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the public first, and we can ask.
Well, Rodney, I'd like to hear from the developer. Rodney, are you the? Thank you, Velia, very much. And Rodney, how much time do you think you need? 5, 10 minutes? Hour? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
We'll take the hour. Under 15 minutes, we should be able to do that.
All right.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and City staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located on Brand Boulevard here in the city of Glendale. Our project is an ownership project. It's condominiums. We have 44 residential condominiums. Most of the units, over 90% of the units, are 2- and 3-bedroom units. 2-bedroom, the average unit size is about 1,200 square feet. And for the 3-bedroom units, the average unit size is about 1,800 square feet. So larger units, family-oriented units, and ownership units, all being proposed by a small local developer. This is the type of project that we have not seen a lot of in our downtown area. As staff mentioned, we have a number of amenities that have been incorporated into our project for the residents, for their guests, and for the public. The residents in terms of private open space, the balconies and patios, the common open space. We have an activity areas. We have a clubhouse and playhouse area, and we also have a fitness center. And then, as you'll see from our design team, the public open space, following your newly adopted standards, which features and incorporates benches, a water feature, shade trees, and welcomes people to come and use this space. What I'd like to do is step aside. Our design team has a presentation for you. I'd like to ask Rob Calnon, our architect, to come forward. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and city staff. My name is Rob Calnon. I'm the architect for this project that we're very excited about to present to you tonight. The board I just handed up to the council members and the mayor is the current materials board for the project. So the project concept here is, as we've discussed, it's a contemporary architecture, but it's got a warm color palette that we feel is consistent and reflects the richness of the other buildings and architecture, particularly along the Broadway area. The form of the building is fairly simple, but we've created articulation with voids that are occurring on all sides of the building to bring shade and shadow into play. And we feel that gives us an interesting form to the building, although the very basic form of the building is fairly simple. And then beyond that, we've added an architectural screen element, which is this element here that runs around the building. It goes on all the visible sides of the building and unifies the architecture of the facade. It also provides a framework for these screen pieces, which are sunshade devices. So in addition to being energy efficient, they also allow us to add some randomness and some more interest to the exterior of the building, which we're very excited about. And again, those occur on all the visible sides of the building. The pedestrian level here, we've taken special care to create something unique down at that level to bring the building down to scale. So it's got a brick veneer, rustic tan and white brick veneer color, which wraps the building. And we've also sunken the building. The entries and the open space, the entry being here and the open space being over here, and the entire setback area along the front of the building, although the first floor of the building is actually a couple feet above grade to create some privacy for the residents, we've designed the building in such a way in the subterranean level so we can drop all those areas in and around the building on the public realm to really try to connect to that public realm. So you're going right into the building or right into the open space. And there's really no disconnection, we feel, between the two. Next slide here. Just a quick outline here of the presentation. So we've got some contextual slides, some massing slides, a couple architectural slides, and some open space slides that I was going to ask our landscape architect, David Ling, to discuss here at the end. quick vicinity map here of the project on Kenwood, just below Broadway. Conveniently located, as everyone here knows, to world-class shopping and dining. And as staff mentioned, we're here mid-block on Kenwood Street. We feel the project is very appropriately scaled with the surrounding buildings. We've got a number of other multi-family projects that are of equal or taller to our proposed project. A couple of quick massing diagrams here for everyone to look at. So this is a view from the northwest looking back towards the building over the parking lots. We've got some parking lots across Kenwood from us to the west. And again, we're about equally sized or height-wise with the building next to us to the north. Another aerial view looking from the northeast back towards the project site, with this here being Jackson, I believe, behind us, and then this alley back here. Something else these massing slides exhibit is the way we've wrapped the building with the architecture. Although we really only have one street frontage, we've really gone to the effort to try to make the building shine on all the sides where you're really going to see it. So we've wrapped the three sides of the building with this same architectural treatment. And this view here is a view looking north on Kenwood Street. So some of the contextual architecture that we feel is very rich and positive in the immediate area is certainly the use of the brick, and also there's accents, interesting accents of materials on some of these other projects as well, and some very interesting detail. So we've tried to incorporate elements of those other buildings into ours, again, to fit in and be consistent with what we've got out there. So a couple things of note here. I mentioned the brick cladding here that we've got at the ground level of the building. Then we've got these warm tones, these warm earth tones that are wrapping the building, both the metalwork and then the facade behind. We're doing again a sunshade louver that occurs on all three sides of the building where this architectural element occurs, and we're going with a upgraded residential window as well. This is a little bit of a unique system because it allows you to get bigger windows, and it allows you to adjust the architecture a little bit because we're no longer being limited to punch windows, small openings. We can go bigger openings on the building, so it's a unique look. And then along the front here at Kenwood, of course, going with some colorful landscaping, which David will talk about shortly. From the plan perspective, what we've tried to do here is we've got this C-shaped building, and we tried to create buffers, as was mentioned earlier, here to the south, to our neighbors to the south, landscape buffers, as well as having some landscape buffer in our setbacks to the street. And then what we've tried to do on this side to the north is to break up the mass of the building to create more of a buffer to the north. So really the mass of our building here just occurs on the west here and the east side, and then there's a large open space here. This is only a few feet above grade, so it's generally open here in the middle third, and we've got additional landscaping and screening here for privacy. And of course, we've got as was mentioned earlier, we've got the parking here coming off the back. We've got the pedestrian entrance coming here off the street at the same level, and then once you're in the building, you go up the stairs and onto the main floor level here. And then we've got of course, the open space area over here that we've designed the building around to get a comfortable sized open space here in the corner and then along the edge of the building. All the floors above are fairly similar to this layout as well. We've got units on three sides, taking advantage of the great views of Glendale, of the mountains, of LA. And the subterranean parking is completely subterranean except for the top couple of feet, which is not visible. It's completely contained within the mass of the building. And if I can, I will ask David to come up and speak to our landscape design.
Madam Mayor, council members, and staff. Real quick, I think everyone touched on the design aspect of what we're trying to do to really bring a special project here to the city. As a landscape architect, work closely with Rob's group and with ownership as well, is to come and how to soften the facade with color, and also keeping in mind with the low water usage plants that the state is encouraging everyone to use. So we did allow for some color and some of the grasses and so forth, just to highlight. And I think one thing that I do want to point out is this: everyone talked about this open space as a very critical element, and that's something we worked hard with the design team, especially city staff, to kind of highlight that with this water feature that's about it's a water wall that's about 15 feet long by 12 feet high, so it's very evident when you're driving down the street or walking along the street with the water feature right there, and with umbrellas and 6 benches and soft seating along the open space. So we try to provide not just amenity for the folks here at this condominium, but also for the surrounding neighbors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from council members? Or would you like to go to the public? I have 16 cards. What I'd like to do at this point is to, since we have so many cards, can I have those people that are here from the Historic Society to please stand up, and let's see how many of you there are. Okay. So what I'd like to ask is, in order to speed this along, not that I'm in any hurry, because I'm not, and I want all of you to have an opportunity, you can sit down now, is to, and how many are here in opposition? I mean, not in opposition, but for the, okay. So what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to have one person speak for, let's say, 5 or as many minutes, I guess, as we can, and then maybe have the rest of you who are going to say exactly the same thing, maybe give up your time. In that way, we know how many of you there are here. We can see that. I will call your names. If you'd like to come up and speak, that will be fine, but we will know that you are all for the project. Or against, I'm sorry, you are against the demolition of the homes. I'm sure that's what you're here for. So, does Kathy Yurka, you have, I know you designated card number 1, so if you'd like to take some extra time for the group.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Devine and members of City Council. My name is Kathy Yurka, and I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society.
Kathy,
and
how much time do you think you need?
Oh,
how much time would you like?
Just so I don't get flustered, how about 6 minutes? I don't think I'll need it all. And it's almost 700 members, many of whom have written you, and I'm not sure where the figure 6 came from, because you should have gotten many, many more emails than that. And our members are here tonight, or they would have been present had this hearing taken place after the holidays. Thank you for the opportunity to speak against certification of the EIR and the project as proposed. The city required the EIR only after we objected to numerous errors and omissions in the first historic resources assessment. Our comments on the second assessment pointed out further flaws in research and conclusions, although some of the gaps that we'd identified had been filled in. We were bewildered at the staff report statement that we provide no new additional information, even though as lead agencies, the city is required to take that information into account when preparing the final EIR. The most important evidence before you, however, is not new. In 2006, the City Council determined the Craftsman at 128 South Kenwood to be a historic resource for purposes of CEQA when it adopted the survey for the Downtown Specific Plan EIR. The Craftsman was one of only 3 single-family houses built after World War I in the entire area to be found eligible for the Glendale Register. The property is materially unchanged since '06, and the consultant has found nothing that would cause council to change its mind now. No alterations, no damage to design, detail, materials, or craftsmanship. Those are the kinds of things that would likely disqualify it upon closer inspection. Indeed, the consultant misses, for the second time, a design feature that makes it rarer still, a pair of hayloft doors known to exist nowhere else in Glendale. The staff report's response to this new information is that they are not character-defining features of the craftsman. That's true, but they're still unique, and that only contributes to the property's local significance. In the first assessment, the consultant failed to identify or do any research into residents of the properties. This did not prevent her from finding them ineligible for the Glendale Register because they were, quote, not associated with residents who have contributed to local or regional history. TGHS found that Reverend Clifford Cole was the owner of 132 South Kenwood, where he lived some 3 decades, and that he made significant contributions to Glendale, the region, and the state. The consultant now downplays most of these or ignores them to try to claim that he was just like any other civic-minded church leader. Our corrections to this are submitted in the documents you received, and I'm not going to reiterate his many, many contributions to Glendale, except for one, because there's a really cool photo of it in the letter that we sent. This is one that the consultant missed entirely, even though we pointed it out months ago. For 23 years, Cole was president and program director of the annual Easter service at Forest Lawn. This was a locally and regionally significant event that drew thousands of people to Glendale each year, and for which in 1946 he was awarded a citation by council, by Forest Lawn, by the news press, and the Parks and Recreation Commission, on which he served for 3 decades. She also missed that he was responsible for the construction of 28 churches in Southern California in his capacity as State Secretary of Christian Churches, which is a remarkable record of achievement. In our letter and the EIR comments, we provided substantial evidence that 132 South Kenwood is eligible for its association with Cole, and I don't understand why none of this counts as new information, since it's not in the assessment. For years, we've argued that there's an inherent conflict of interest when developers select and hire the EIR consultant, and we're glad that the city has changed that policy, and we know that this was grandfathered in. We don't impugn anyone's motives, but we do make the point that the applicant's consultant was very sloppy indeed. And those of us who are here to argue that the property is historic, based on our research and facts, donate their time because Glendale is our home, we love it, and we want the city to treat its historic resources with the consideration they deserve and are entitled to under CEQA, and to encourage responsible development. The only change to the property since 2006 is a developer wants condos there. That's not enough to have the council not stand by its survey and stand by the finding that 128 South Kenwood is a historic resource. Just this year, more than 25 additional craftsman houses have been demolished or proposed for demolition, mostly in South Glendale. Another 20 others, more than 20 others went in the decade before that. In other words, 128 South Kenwood is rarer now than it was 10 years ago. There are multiple reasons for a surge in applications, but a principal one is that our city has a reputation for not caring about its historic buildings, and developers know this. We who wrote in, who are here tonight, who can't be here tonight but wish we could, say that we do care, and we ask you to care too. We've provided substantial evidence that both craftsmen are historic resources under CEQA. We ask that you please require preparation of a subsequent EIR that recognizes the historic resources and considers preservation alternatives to the proposed project. This is another way of saying that the project alternative section of the EIR is just, you should pretend it's not there, because it's considering real alternatives. They think it's not a historic resource, so they're not required to include that in an EIR. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay. Francesca Smith. She wants to speak.
Madam Mayor, how much time for it?
About 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'll go as quickly as I can, and I'll try to avoid repetition. Thank you, Madam Mayor and honorable council members, for the opportunity to comment on this seemingly unimportant case before you. My name is Francesca Smith. I'm an architectural historian with more than 3 decades of experience evaluating properties for historic significance throughout California, as well as in Nevada, Texas, Utah, Colorado, Ohio, Illinois, and other states. Unlike these cases, my evaluations are thoroughly reviewed by respective state historic preservation officers. They're called SHPOs, and are normally, my findings are made on behalf of public agencies. They're subject to a high degree of scrutiny, a lot of public comment, and I am currently staffed to a state agency where I spend most of my time reviewing consultants' reports. We review and comment on their reports a lot. I have found that Glendale accepts them and for some reason doesn't feel comfortable with commenting on them. I spend most of my time schooling consultants and trying to teach them the laws that apply to historic properties. It's a critical part of my job. I think this is a turning point where you all can either go with the flow and continue Glendale becoming overbuilt, or you can ask for a subsequent EIR where the properties are recognized as historical resources under CEQA. I have served as staff to the cities of LA and Pasadena and as a consultant to Santa Monica and numerous other cities, and I can tell you we wouldn't be here in those cities. It would have been handled differently. We're not against this project necessarily. We're against this project being done this way where the historical resources aren't taken into consideration. As Kathy said, we all donate our time and we have a lot of other things we'd rather do. We would prefer not to be watchdogs over the city of Glendale because we all treasure our citizenship in the Jewel City. The city-sponsored, city council adopted survey found 128 South Kenwood to be historically significant. Because it has presumptive historic significance under CEQA, the consultants failed to recognize that. I think it would be ingenuous of you all to overturn what were your previous findings without any evidence showing it's not significant. I won't iterate what Kathy said. It was compared against more modest examples of the style and not significant ones in the consultant's report. The evaluation of Clifford Cole, I will point out there is one property that's locally designated that was associated with Reverend James Brower. I'll hurry. He was locally significant, but nowhere near matching the achievements and the national influence that Clifford Cole had. We think we provided substantial evidence that there are historic resources. They are based on substantial evidence, expert opinion based on facts, as well as reasonable assumptions predicated on facts. I will leave out the end bullets because they're much like Kathy's, but I will remind you that a subsequent EIR could treat these as historical resources, and the proposed project may be possible. It would only require a statement of overriding consideration or mitigation measures to remunerate the community for the loss of the historic properties. Thank you so much.
Thank you. David Ling, did you want to speak? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Robert, you've already spoken. Rodney Kahn, you've already spoken. They put these in there. Okay. John Ballion, did you want to speak?
Yes, briefly.
Thank you.
Mayor, council members, my first time here. Thanks for having me. Somebody much smarter than me once said, we will be remembered for the buildings we tear down, not the buildings we preserve. Think about that for a second. If you look at photos of old Glendale, God, that was a cool place. All we had to do was leave it. I moved here from the west side of LA. I'm a small business owner. I'm a homeowner. I live in North Glendale. My kids are going to school. I love the neighborhoods. I love the historic fabric, and it's been well preserved north of Glendale. What's happening south of the 134 is turning the city into a traffic nightmare. It's destroying historic buildings. It's allowing apartments. Now, granted, this project is the kind of project I'd like to see more of, and I applaud your design. I applaud your thoughtfulness and Your drought-tolerant landscaping looks good. This appeals to me, but just not on a historic property. And so it's a significant issue to a lot of people who are moving here for the character of the neighborhood to not see the character destroyed, not just in the north where we're protected from a lot of this rampant development and density, but down south where we have to travel through to go shop, to go eat, and to go to our jobs. So please keep that in mind. This is becoming a galvanizing issue, not just for me, but for the entire Historic Society. I'd like to see more consideration done along proper guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce Merritt?
I will be brief, 2 minutes. Good evening, Mayor Devine, members of the council. My name is Bruce Merritt. I am a member of the Glendale Historical Society, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm speaking as an individual who is highly distressed by what I perceive to be an increasing indifference on the part of the city to Glendale's historic resources. What we have here, I think, is a fairly simple situation. 10 years ago, this city designated 128 South Kenwood as being a historic resource eligible for the Glendale Register. Now the staff comes back with the proposition that this house is no longer significant and that in fact it should just be plowed under and forgotten. What has changed in those 10 years? The house hasn't changed. We know that. It's unaltered. So that isn't it. We haven't discovered a whole bunch of previously unknown craftsman houses that were hiding somewhere in Glendale and that now make this one less unique. In fact, in the last 5 years, we've seen the wholesale destruction of a lot of the craftsman houses that are part of our historic heritage in this city. So what has changed? Well, what has changed, and we hear this over and over again, what has changed is that now a developer wants to make some money here, and this house is standing in the way. And it's a similar story, and unfortunately what has not changed in the last 10 years is that the developer in Glendale seems to always get what he wants. And I think that's the reality of what's going on here. If you talk to people in the street, and I talk to people about this a lot, the perception is that the developers own this town. And this is really a classic example. A building that was once regarded as eligible for the Glendale Register can now be made an unimportant old house with the snap of a finger by a developer and some consultants. That's very simple. And I suggest that the issue before you, members of the council, is also simple. Do you want to be a part of that? Thank you.
Mike Morgan.
Good evening. My name is Mike Morgan. I typed it out, so it should go pretty quickly on this. I value your time and I appreciate it. Anyway, Madam Mayor, City Council, City Manager, staff, and residents. My name is Michael Morgan, a longtime resident of Glendale. I am here to ask the City Council to not certify the EIR for 126, 128, and 132 South Kenwood, and that some other project alternatives to demolition be considered, and I will tell you why. In my youth, about 8 years of age, in 1959, I used to ride my bicycle around Glendale, and one of my favorite destinations was the old Carnegie Library. I would cut off Glendale Avenue and down Kenwood, going past 132 South Kenwood, where Reverend Cole resided. He would wave, and I would wave back. Even at that young age, I knew he was important in Glendale. Years later, I worked in the Carnegie Library in the special collections and noticed a file with his name on it. I must tell you, those files were kept about people who lived in Glendale that were influential in Glendale's history and growth. Knowing now, having been on the Historic Preservation Commission, Mr. Cole and his house would definitely qualify to be on Glendale Register under criteria 2, which reads quickly, the property must be associated with a person, persons, or groups who significantly contribute to the history of the nation, state, or region. Reverend Cole's life in Glendale is the outline by which all other residents should be judged. While traveling again on my bike on Kenwood, I would go past John Wayne's house, which was at 129 South Kenwood, directly across from the Craftsman at 128 South Kenwood, which even then stood out on Kenwood with its interesting design. And criteria 3, which embodies the distinctive characteristics of type, period, region, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, or possesses high artistic values. As mentioned above, this house was already identified to be a historic resource. Sorry, I'm combining two different things, the letter I sent to you and mine. Unfortunately, when the city moved the library to its present location, they sold the property. The west one half of Kenwood Street disappeared. Happily, the other half is still here and echoes the footsteps of earlier residents. When the staff is making out their reports and the historical consultants are trying to satisfy their clients' wishes, the real reason is lost. It's the people who built this city that should be honored. 126, 128, and 132 accomplished that feat. There is so little in Glendale now that reflects the historical essence of who we were. It would be a crime to replace it with just another building. Future residents will ask, couldn't you have left us something? The last vestiges of Glendale's most famous citizen, John Wayne, honored in place where he was born, Winterset, Iowa, and died, Newport Beach, but not where he went to school and formulated the personage known worldwide, rests in the street where he lived and went to high school as senior class president, which is criteria 5, which just says, the historic resource exemplifies the early heritage of the city. These houses together give you the essence of what it was like to live in Glendale. And finishing up, let's wait until the South Glendale Community Plan is enacted before we start removing Glendale's historic resource. Please spare the neighborhood and not certify the EAR and seek a more positive outcome to Glendale's historic legacy. And I'm sorry I went over. Thank you.
Joanne Wilson.
I'll be brief, less than 2 minutes, because so many people have said so eloquently what we all believe. I just wanted to say from a personal standpoint, first of all, my name is Jomi Wilson. I've lived in Glendale since 1986, where we bought our little Spanish bungalow that I adore, and I'm a member of the Glendale Historical Society and a docent at the Brand Library and at the Doctor's House. From a personal standpoint, my husband and I take long daily walks around our neighborhood, and the 800 block of Palm Street has a little plaque on it designating it as a jewel neighborhood. And I get such a lift in my heart every time I walk down this block and other blocks like it, just full of charming Spanish and craftsmen and storybook bungalows. And then a few blocks later, we're surrounded by condos, not as artistically designed as these gentlemen have done. And I do appreciate, again, your thoughtfulness. But the problem is development. It's just the loss of what we treasure here in Glendale. I had an appointment with a new dental hygienist last week, and as we were chatting, getting acquainted, I said, I love Glendale. And she laughed at me. And she said, I used to like living here, but not anymore. She said, I just hate all this development. And I know every city changes, and development cannot be avoided. I have architect friends. I love architecture, but it's got to be thoughtful change. And the loss of our irreplaceable historic resources must stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellie Lester.
Thanks. Rather than writing, I felt strongly enough about this to come down and talk to you myself. I am a member of the Historical Society, but I'm speaking for myself, a long-term resident of the city. A lot has been said that I agreed with very much by the Historical Society members, but there's a few bigger picture issues that I thought might be worth saying. I think that you should oppose the destruction of these craftsmen, and it's because I think that the downtown should be able to accommodate all housing types. It's a form of diversity, and diversity is the strength of the city. Jane Jacobs talked about this 60 years ago in The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And particularly when one of these houses has auxiliary units or granny flats, it actually builds up the density in a downtown area where it's most valuable without taking away the original form of the city. Old buildings matter when it comes to a sense of place. Dynamic small business people and talented young people with the wherewithal to live where they please are looking for authenticity. Old buildings, and particularly those built before World War II, have it. I've lived in several places throughout Glendale in apartments. Now I live in a house, and I've found this to be true. Please don't allow the demolition of these craftsmen. I think it would be a big mistake. Thank you.
Andrew Allison, did you care to speak? Followed by Stephen Hunt.
Hi, Mayor and council members. This will be fast, I promise.
That's what they all say.
I know that. This is going to be true, though. I'd just like to speak quickly about the importance of recognizing and conserving the diminishing architectural resources in Glendale, historic resources, especially in the increasingly urbanized areas of South Glendale. There's a lot of development going on in our city. The types of significant historic buildings, such as the South Kenwood Craftsman Houses, in conjunction with quality new development, can contribute to Glendale's character as both a place with an appealing past and a forward-thinking future. It's important to recognize the locations that remind us of Glendale's past, which provide us with unique evidence of past architectural and civic development, or which commemorate people important in the history of Glendale. A variety of building scales, ages, styles add to the character of the city and make our streets interesting and visually dynamic. The character of certain areas of South Glendale have been altered through the demolition of historic resources and overdevelopment. I'm a resident of South Glendale. I live in Adams Hill. In moving forward, we, the Historical Society and myself, we ask the city to follow your established guidelines for protecting historic resources and encouraging smart development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Stephen Hunt, did you care to? Followed by Roberta Medford.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I'm proud to be here. First time I've done this. I've lived in Glendale over 65 years. I've seen a lot of change in those years, but I live here now and I'll continue to live here because city councils all those years, staff and like that, have made good decisions, and Glendale is the great city it is to live in now. One of those things they did for all these years is to preserve the history of Glendale. So I'm asking you to consider that here. Walking distance from City Council here is a house with a lot of history, a house that the city itself designated as a historical site. So I'd ask the council, the staff here, to move forward and try and help preserve this piece of history this close to City Council. Thank you.
Roberta Medford, did you care to speak?
Good, covered.
Okay, thank you. Sonia Hans.
I was born in Glendale. I've worked in Glendale for over 26 years, and I'm familiar with this project, and I'm here supporting it. So,
thank you. Adida?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I live in Glendale for 15 years, and I'm here to support the project. I understand that it's always hard to demolish old thing. We kind of have hard time to accept that, but everything new, we can see Americana. We've been so against that, but today we're enjoying. And I think this project is a very good project, and it will good addition to our downtown of Glendale. Thank you.
Daniel Brotman.
I'll pass.
Thank you. Leah Clement. And followed by Elizabeth Berry.
Hi, my name is Leah Clement, and my first time doing this. The arguments the Historical Society has given are very compelling, and the development in Glendale, I understand that cities have to change, things have to grow, but I think that some of this development is irresponsible. I'm going to give you an example. I live and I manage an apartment building on Jackson Street, right down the street here. And I'm also here on behalf of the ownership, who understands that development is a necessary part of growth anywhere. However, as far as being irresponsible, the last few years there have been two multi-use buildings built on Jackson Street. On Harvard, I think I think it's the I don't want to use the wrong word, the senior housing. The two projects on Broadway, Kenwood, and Broadway and Kenwood, the big one they have there, and the other ones. I'm not sure. I think, from what I understand, the reason they have the traffic flow into the alley between Jackson Street and Kenwood is because of the senior housing on Kenwood, and they can't have access from these new projects onto Kenwood. Now, if anybody wants to go down and take a block down the street and walk in that alley, okay? Already it's a nightmare in that alley for the traffic. Already. The traffic has to flow north. It has to come out of two parking lots, two multi-use buildings right now have to flow onto that alley and then curve around onto Jackson Street, and then you have maybe 500 to 1,000 feet, the light on Jackson and Broadway. Already cars are backed up into the alley. So this project is going to be even further down the alley. So now we have three multi-mixed-use traffic all coming into that alley. And I'm not a developer, I'm not an architect, but I cannot see how all that traffic is going to get through that alley and back into that alley in that short alley. So, if this project goes through or whatever, I think that needs to be looked at, because I think it's very irresponsible not to deal with that issue, because it's going to be a nightmare. The alley is not long enough, it's not big enough. The egress from the alley onto Jackson Street, where all that traffic is going to go through, your lights only, people are already backed up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Elizabeth Berry.
Good evening. I've never been here before. Thank you for entertaining our comments. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Berry. I've lived in Glendale for over 60 years. I love it. I've watched it. My kids have grown up here. But in the last 10 years or so, I've been appalled at what I've seen as demolishing history and building ugly condominiums. The traffic is terrible. The building architects and developers don't seem to have any sense of design and style, which is one of my pet peeves, in addition to the inordinate amount of traffic. So I've listened to everything that was said. The Historical Society people have made some excellent arguments, and I urge you to agree with them. Thank you.
Very much. And that is all the cards that I have. Mr. Khan, or the architect, would you like to make comments? Pardon? A rebuttal?
Madam Mayor and City Council, I'll address some of the items that have been stated, and I also know that I think potentially staff could address some of them as well. First off, in terms of the environmental impact report, we were before you, I think, 8-9 months ago, and the item was pulled. And the reason it was pulled is to do a fully analyzed environmental impact report with thorough analysis that could be done and completed prior to any discussion of this project. That's exactly what was done. That information was provided. That information has been analyzed and scrutinized by your staff, and the conclusion was this was not a historic resource, either on national, state, or local level. The second thing, a few of the speakers have said 10 years ago in the past, this property was listed or was some type of historic recording. It was not. It was simply identified. And then from that point, it was pending further intensive level survey. In fact, what's not said is in 2007, a 28-unit apartment project was proposed on this site. There was historic assessment performed. The conclusion was it was not significant. In fact, that project came to City Council and it was approved back in 2007. Had the economy not changed, that project would be built and constructed up today. I understand that people don't like change. I also understand that in terms of the project itself, we feel we've spent a considerable amount of time designing this project. This is a well-designed project. I, too, live in the city of Glendale. I, too, think in terms of overall the city. This project at this location, I think, is an excellent asset for our entire city. I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Do we have questions from council? Before I close the hearing?
I have questions from staff.
So do I. So.
Okay, Mr. Petty first.
Maybe Billy, I can answer it, or Jay. The 2007 survey, because right now we have two reports basically that indicates that this is not historic, and they are challenging that report, saying that it is historic. So we're going to heavily rely on what our staff has done in the last 10 years and find out if it's historic or not. So in 2007, the survey that was done by the city, and was there a survey done that said this house may have some historical value and there's a need of more survey done?
I'm going to start out, Councilmember Garpetian, council members. The 2006 study that was done by Jones and Stokes on behalf of the Downtown Specific Plan, EIR, was a reconnaissance level survey that was precluded. It's basically a windshield survey. At that point in time, it was determined, and I have handouts if you'd like, that the 126 South Kenwood is not eligible. 132 is not eligible but may warrant special consideration. And specifically, the 128 South Kenwood project, or I should say the Craftsman home, was determined individually eligible for California Register by reconnaissance level survey, pending intensive level survey and formal evaluation. So that it essentially says that it could be potentially historic pending intensive level survey. That analysis was then done subsequently by EP Associates in the 2007 intensive level survey that was just mentioned by Mr. Rodney Kahn. And that survey, the intensive level survey, had the determination that the building, or in this case the Craftsman home, was not considered a historic resource, and the demolition was not considered to be a significant impact.
And Meridian Consultants, they have the same conclusions?
Because of the time difference from the 2007 survey to today, essentially close to 10 years, the Arroyo Associates then prepared a subsequent historical resource assessment, and the same conclusion was made that the existing residences were determined not to be historically significant.
Okay. Are they here today? Are your consultants here today, the one who conducted the EIR?
Juliet Arroyo from Arroyo Associates, yes, is sitting in the audience, and so is Mr. Tony Locacciato on behalf of who prepared the EIR for Meridian Consulting.
And if I could add something about those surveys, the recent assessments have the benefit of the information that we've gleaned from the 2007 Craftsman survey. The Craftsman survey did not look at these properties because it didn't consider this zone and didn't look at the DSP specifically. The 2006 DSP survey was looking primarily within the boundary of the DSP, which largely excluded all single-family homes and pretty much all residential neighborhoods, except for the few blocks along Isabel Jackson and Kenwood that we're looking at here. The reason for that was because those had been upzoned in 2003 to create a residential mixed-use zone. So there was an anticipation as early as 2003 that this area would be upzoned. When we look at the Craftsman survey as a basis for information, it gives us an opportunity to provide context in terms of the Craftsman development all through South Glendale. I believe that that's the appropriate measure to consider how these two houses, or I guess 128 is one we're focusing on for architecture, how that house compares to other properties surveyed in the comprehensive Craftsman survey that looked at all high-density multifamily zones. When you look at this, and I appreciate the concerns of the community, and I share a lot of their passion for these houses, when you see an old, nice Craftsman house, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is a historic house that is eligible for the Glendale Register. When we look at the Craftsman survey, we see dozens of comparable houses to 128 South Kenwood that were given a status code of 6L, meaning they're not eligible for local designation. So that gives us the best objective analysis that we can provide. There's still subjectivity in all of this, and you hear from the community that they may not agree with that. But I could offer to, luckily we're going to be redoing a survey for all of South Glendale. We'll be able to revisit a lot of these designations, but compared to what the information we have, 128 does look like a 6L more than it does like an individual property, individually eligible property.
So in order for them to conduct an EIR, we gave them the guidelines, am I correct? As to what the EIR has to...
Sure.
The guidelines for the EIR. So within that guideline was the resident who lived in that house, the priest, as well as the architectural elements such as the doors. Were they part of the guidelines? Because now we're getting to the very, very specific items that was not indicated in the survey, and the subsequent EIR is being proposed to be conducted. And I wanted to know if these were part of the EIR that was done by Royal Resources.
So some of the information came in after that. The hayloft doors that were mentioned by the Historical Society, we they had never mentioned that earlier. We have done, just the other day, I have a potential scar on my scalp to prove it. We went to visit the site, went up into the attic, and can prove that those were not hayloft doors. It was a later addition or a later alteration to the house. We can't say exactly why the doors were there, but they don't have the characteristics of hayloft doors to start with, and you can see the alterations when you're inside the attic. With regard to Reverend Cole, I think the Historical Society has done a tremendous amount of good research on his contributions to the community, but I don't think they've put it in enough context to convince me personally or professionally that he's significant. I think we would need to raise that up in my estimation, but ultimately that will be your decision whether it's tonight or another night.
Okay, that's all I have at this time.
Follow up, and I'm sure you mentioned this. So the 2007 survey was requisitioned by whom? Who?
There were two 2007 surveys, so it's a little confusing. There was for the previous project on this subject site, there was a survey that just looked at these two houses that were on the site, and it found them not to be significant.
And who did the developer order those EIRs? Or
the developer, I mean, this before my time, but I assume
Probably.
Associates did that.
Correct. For that project that Mr. Khan referenced.
Okay, and then the second 2007?
The other 2000 surveys, the Craftsman survey, which did not survey these because they're not in the right zone, but we do use it as kind of a benchmark to compare other Craftsman houses, since we looked at hundreds of Craftsman.
Okay, so you rely on the second 2007 survey to determine the historicity of these homes now, while that second 2007 survey did not per se evaluate these properties. Right?
Yeah,
is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And the reference that's being made to the 2006 City Council decision, if I heard you correctly, there's a bit of a sort of a conflict there. Council adopted the the new guidelines with the intention of building up that neighborhood, but at the same time, Historical Society is saying that, well, that was an admission, or that was somehow council accepting the historicity of these.
There's so many layers here. That was a 2003 upzoning to create a new zone that was called a residential mixed use that went along with the commercial mixed use zone that was on Broadway in Colorado. And I only put that in there because there was an expectation that this area was going to change because of its proximity to the kind of major thoroughfares.
And then what happened in 2006?
So 2006, when the city conducted the environmental impact report for the downtown specific plan,
right,
as Ms. Samatitis indicated, we did a reconnaissance level survey, meaning just having the consultant is walking by, analyzing the house from the street. I'm not sure if review of paperwork is done, but it's not the intensive level surveys that were done subsequent. And again, just to emphasize, it was not a city determination that it's historic and that's it. It's a determination that based on what they're looking at, it may be. In fact, the same document that Billy just read says the residence appears individually eligible for listing pending an intensive level survey and formal evaluation. It was really intended as the first step in the process, so that when projects came after the DSP was adopted, there'd be something for the staff to look at to say, hey, we identified this as potentially historic. Now go do an intensive level survey.
And that's very different from council basically deeming it to be historic.
In my view, yes.
Okay.
So I have a follow-up with Mr. Platt. Hi, Jay. So about a month ago, you were before us urging the approval of a Mills Act for a home in which a radio broadcaster or television actor whom had lived in that house only 3 years had given it the significance. So let me get this straight here, that we've got someone now, a leader of the faith community throughout Southern California who lived 3 decades in that house. Would this house be eligible for a Mills Act if it was brought forward based on the criteria that you gave us for the actor who lived 3 years in that house?
If the Historic Preservation Commission recommended to council that it be designated and put on the Mills Act, yes, it would be.
But professionally, do you think it would be eligible based on the criteria?
Personally and professionally, reading all of the evidence about the Reverend Cole, I do think I would want to have more context. What I do when we receive nominations all the times where a lot of the houses in Glendale were owned by successful business people. I always tell people just being successful in business and being a member of philanthropic organizations and clubs isn't enough to necessarily make you pass the threshold for designation. The information that we have right now about Reverend Cole doesn't give that to me, largely because we don't have context for what we're reading. We're seeing citations where he's mentioned in an article here or there. Definitely a figure of public interest, definitely a member of the community, definitely a solid citizen. I would disagree with Ms. Smith. I think the Reverend Brower had a national reputation, and I think he is much more known now, significant now, and also had connections directly to his house as well as the work he did in the community. But that doesn't mean we couldn't have houses designated because they're associated with 2 reverends in town. But I would look for more information before I'd make my final judgment.
That was my question.
Question.
And I have an issue with that because you did support the Baker house, and it had been altered, and he had only lived there a few years. This guy was in our city for 50 years. He was not that that makes a difference. He was a Quantian, but he was 30 years on our Parks Commission. It seems to me that he had a great deal of impact on our community, especially with the forest lawn connection. And it just seems to me a contradiction that a few weeks ago you supported that house and this week you're not supporting it.
It was the Historic Preservation Commission that supported that house. I believe I mentioned to you that personally through my reading of it, I was on the fence with Mr. Baker for a long time. And I also mentioned at that hearing that there is a difference because we have owner consent requirements in Glendale, when an owner nominates their property and say they nominate it under Criterion 2, there's the threshold may be less contentious. There's not as much contention, and there is subjectivity to this kind of designation, especially when we're talking about who is significant and who isn't. We try to be as objective as we can, as I mentioned, looking at the Craftsman survey. But I understand your confusion about it, and there's no simple
It's like not
answer.
everybody's John Wayne. There are some people that we don't know that we don't recognize their names. We didn't know them, but they did have an impact.
That's why we do this process. Sure.
I mean, every citizen has an impact. Every resident has an impact. The question is, does that impact amount to historical importance? I mean, that's the benchmark. That's why if you have an individual who had a role in this city, may not be historic, but John Wayne certainly is. No one's going to doubt that. No one's going to dispute that.
Well, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. I have another question. Where does the EIR specifically address the 2006 and 7 technical report? Is it in there in the EIR where you specifically?
I think it's in.
Is it in writing in there? Because
Maybe Mr. Locacciato can address it. I think it's in both and I apologize, I wasn't trying to get a particular result. I actually think you have discretion here either way. My point in speaking to the point was I think there's an implication that there's only one legal result that can come from this, and I disagree with that. I think there's substantial evidence on both sides. It is a discretionary determination on your part at this point, whether you feel it's historic or not, based on the evidence, not whether you feel it, but whether you think which evidence you think is more important. So it really is discretionary at this point.
And to answer your question, Madam Mayor, it is listed under the Cultural Resources section of the EIR, specifically on page 4.1-28 in regards to the 2007 downtown survey.
Oh, okay, I got that.
Based on the research and analysis as contained in this report, which was an intensive level survey, meaning the technical resource, the historical resource assessment that was prepared by Arroyo Associates, the property at 128 South Kenwood Street was determined to be ineligible for the Glendale Register of Historic Resources. The downtown survey additionally identified but did not provide a survey form for 132 South Street. The property was listed in an inventory table with the notation not eligible but may warrant special.
Is that the 2006 or the 2007?
Well, the 2006 downtown survey was essentially the downtown specific plan final EIR. The survey itself that was prepared by Jones and Stokes was done in 2006.
2006.
Correct.
For the DSP.
As a technical report for the 2007 downtown specific plan final EIR.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
Yeah, can we?
Mr. Najjar, no, you can't. I'm sorry. Can he? No. Go ahead. No.
It's up to you.
Thank
but
you.
Can we ask the consultant to maybe clarify some of the points were raised by the public?
Good evening, members of council. My name is Juliette Arroyo. I'm a consultant, a historic resource consultant with over 15 years of historic resource experience. We conducted the intensive level historic resource report. So I just wanted to make a couple quick points about the eligibility of the property. We use the National Register methodology when we evaluate properties to see if they have significance or not. Yes, the homes are intact Craftsman homes, but in order to be eligible, you must evaluate it within its context. So we're looking at two things here. Whoops. We're looking at architecture, and we're looking at the role of Reverend Cole. So under architecture, we have to look at, we know it's a Craftsman home. So we're looking at it in terms of the context for Craftsman architecture. So as Jay mentioned, the city did a Craftsman context statement. And that was used to find that it wasn't eligible in terms of architecture. For Reverend Cole, what we used was the citywide context statement, which includes a theme of religious institutions, social organizations that we evaluated his role within that. And we found that he doesn't rise to the level of significance in the role that he played in Glendale. As Jay mentioned, he was an outstanding individual, but there was nothing in the record that described how he contributed to Glendale's development, advancement, and history. So those are the two main points. We evaluated it within the context. Yes, Reverend Cole was an active, involved member of the community, and yes, this is an intact example of craftsman home, but the threshold of significance was not there.
Can you explain one more time the architectural portion of it? You said you use city survey to determine that it's not historic, or it doesn't have.
Yeah, because under the National Register methodology, the first test is integrity. It meets the integrity test. It has all of its 7 aspects of integrity. The second test is to evaluate it within its context. So what we did was we used the city's 2007 Craftsman Survey, which is a really good survey and very, very useful tool to evaluate properties. As I mentioned, not all intact craftsman homes meet the eligibility requirement of the Glendale Register.
Let me stop you right there and ask you a question. What if the city didn't have that craftsman survey? Then what would have been your
Then what we do when we do lots of intensive level historic resource surveys. What we always do in every single case is we develop the context statement for the property. So an evaluation may have 6 or 7 context statements depending on the particular property. This one has 2 main context statements, actually 3. It has citywide, it has churches, religious, and social institutions, and it has craftsmen. So under those context statements, which we actually built off of what's already there, so we actually expanded it. So in the craftsman survey, we expanded it for evaluation of this property. And then for Reverend Cole, we expanded that theme in the city's wide context to evaluate his importance. And this is a standard National Register methodology for evaluating the significance, and it could be used local, state, or national.
May I? I just want to interject. It says, I have a statement here that in the 2006 Specific Plan Survey, a number of the properties in the area were deemed significant, including 128 Kenwood, which is cited as, and I quote, exemplary of design, detail, materials, and craftsmanship from this period. And you disagree with this?
It's an intact example. It's a very good example. It doesn't exhibit the features that are exemplary of the craftsman style. And this would be features such as lattice work in the gable, design brickwork, architectural features.
But aren't there different types of craftsmen that don't have all of that articulation?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the craftsman style, is each craftsman home is individual, has its own character defining features. So what we do is we do an architectural evaluation, and we look at all of the character defining features that then we define it as craftsman, yes. But the threshold in between intact, exemplary, it doesn't meet that threshold. And as Jay mentioned, there's the state methodology for surveying properties. We use that methodology also.
I'm not sure Okay, thank you. Any other questions from... can I ask Ms. Smith to come up and... how do you evaluate the same way, or can I, is that...
I could answer that. We evaluated it for National Register eligibility. We did not find that it rose to that level. It was also separately evaluated for California Register alone, which it didn't meet either. As a locally eligible property, it is considered California Register eligible. National Register criteria and guidance applies to the National Register. The Glendale Register has no stated requirements for integrity, and it has very brief criteria that include being an important person in the community.
So they're using national criteria and rather than...
It would seem.
Glendale. Okay, thank you. I just wanted a clarification on that one. Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
But I would like to know what is the standard practice? Is it maybe staff can answer it? Because we give them a guideline to go out and conduct an EIR. Do we ask them to go to the national or local or state? Because if you're not eligible for local, there's no way you can get on the national level. So
the reason we did the EIR is because we had a conflict of opinion among experts with the different surveys and findings you're hearing about. We look at national, California, and local eligibility under CEQA if project is seen as locally eligible, and you certified an EIR that said that, then you would have to approve a statement of overrides to approve the project. If you find it not to be eligible, then it is not considered a historic resource, and that's kind of standard CEQA practice.
Okay.
We have someone else?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Tony Lacacciato with Meridian Consultants. I am not a historic resources expert. I assist staff.
No, I'm kidding.
I do deal with CEQA extensively for all topics, and I assist the staff with putting together this EIR. I just want to clarify one thing. There's a difference between methodology and standards. What the cities did under the California Environmental Quality Act is follow the Environmental Quality Act. Section 15064.5 has all the criteria for determining the significance of impacts to archaeological and historic resources. That's the standard that was followed. There's a definition of historic resources. That's what the Arroyo consultants work. So those facts were filtered through the standards and the CEQA guidelines. First, so there's a definition of what's a historic resource under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, totally apart from National Register standards or what you could do if you want to get a Mills Act tax break on something which isn't the same as being identified as a historic resources as defined under state law. You're a historic resource for purposes of environmental review under California if the resource is listed in or determined to be eligible for listing on the state historic resources, or if it was already identified as significant, not potentially significant, but significant in a local survey that was done in accordance with state standards or in the Public Resources Code. So I think when Ms. Roy was talking about the National Register standards, they're the same criteria, which are to be listed on the state register. You're associated with events that have made a significant contribution to broad patterns of California's history and cultural heritage, is associated with the lives of persons important in our past, embodies distinctive exemplary characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master. Frank Lloyd Wright designed it. We know it's historic. When you rise to that level for the National Register, it's pretty clear. For local resources, you do get to wrestle with making those determinations. But those were the criteria used. Now, those are the same criteria for national, but it wasn't evaluated for whether it was national. It was evaluated for whether it met these criteria, eligible for the state or eligible for your local register, because that's what makes it a historic resource under CEQA. Then I did want to also just mention a couple other things. The 2006 survey, it was real clear in the DSP EIR what the purpose of that survey was. As Mr. Garcia said, it says all throughout the DSP EIR, the purpose of the reconnaissance level survey conducted was to identify potential historic resource properties that exist. This information is then used to evaluate the DSP. The reconnaissance level survey, and I'm reading directly from the EIR, The reconnaissance level survey results distinguish between known historic resources and potential historical properties, pending future intensive level survey. So those are all the things that were potentially eligible. And there's a mitigation measure in the EIR, which is what the city's been following ever since the CR was certified and the DSP was approved. In the event a future development project such as this within the DSP plan area is proposed on a site containing a potential historic property, the city shall require, as part of the environmental review of that project, an intensive level survey to determine whether the property is a historic resource under CEQA, the definition I read you a minute ago, if the intensive level survey makes that determination. So the process the city has followed is exactly the one that was laid out in the DSP, which said it was potential, evaluated further. And then when we get to the adequacy of the EIR, just the last couple things I wanted to mention, you know, we do have standards, and standards for adequacy of an EIR says an EIR should be prepared with a sufficient degree of analysis to provide you, who have to make a decision, with information that enables you to take a decision which intelligently takes into account potential environmental consequences. Evaluation of the environmental effects need not be exhaustive, but needs to be reviewed in the light of what is reasonably feasible. Disagreement among experts doesn't make an EIR inadequate, but the EIR should summarize the main points of disagreement. So we fairly put in the final EIR both what Francisca Smith said, what Juliet Arroyo said. There are some different opinions here, as Jay Platt mattered. And when it comes to a conclusion in an EIR, I'd like to say they're all perfect, but they're not. There's a definition in the law of substantial evidence. What supports a conclusion? Is it one opinion versus another? It can be, but substantial evidence means enough relevant information and reasonable inferences from this information that a fair argument can be made to support a conclusion, even though other conclusions might be reached. So these are the standards in the CEQA guidelines. It was evaluated for its significance as defined by CEQA, in accordance with the CEQA guidelines, in accordance with the mitigation measure in the DSP EIR.
Thank you. Good.
Can you tell us your name for the record, please? I don't know if you introduced yourself or not. So
I did at the beginning. I'm Tony Locacciato, a principal of Meridian Consultants.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, we'll close the hearing and open for discussion. Potential vote. Who would like to begin? Okay, Mr. Najarian, thank you.
I do appreciate that this went back for an EIR. What we're faced with are, what I'm faced with, I don't want to speak for anyone else, are two different opinions as to the historical significance of this. I do believe that and I read all the information on the Reverend Clifford Cole. I do believe that he was a person of significance in the community, for which these homes on this, in particular his house at 132, should be protected and should be identified as historically significant. I understand there's back and forth on this, differences of opinions. I can understand, but I do have to err on the side of believing that it's significant. Let me move on to a couple other items, which are really not as important as what I just stated, but I'm not thrilled at all with the open space, the public open space that was placed in this. If this is what our DSP permits, someone to make basically the setback along the side of their property, call it at 11 feet wide, you guys know what 11 feet is. It's a length of one of these rows here, to be a usable open space, which permits the developer to increase his floor area ratio and his height. I have a problem with that, as well as using additional private open space inside the building to reach that that standard. So I have a problem with that as well. I think the water, and I'm not a water geek, but I just read the the analysis of the water use, and what we're looking at is a 2010 surplus of 15,000 acre feet a year of water, and nothing has been updated since then. And as you know, the city has put thousands of units on the market since 2010. I'm not sure we have that sort of surplus that the EIR addresses. I think the city's overbuilt. Let me go a little bit further and opinionize. I think we need to just slow it down. I think these homes are attractive craftsmen that should be retained, or at least now identified and dealt with some mitigation efforts, either to relocate them or to give us other ideas as to how to deal with them in an appropriate manner. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
We'll wait for Mr. Garpetian. He seems to be.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we were going to talk about the design and everything else, because I have comments about the design, but I think we were just certifying the EIR. If that's not going to go through, the design portion of it is not, it's irrelevant at this point. But I will address it a little bit as well. I really don't know. I mean, we have two different opinions, expert opinions, and the gentleman who came up, Tony Ocaccia, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, pardon me, but he made it a lot more clear than both sides did. And if it's a discretion, I don't know where this is going to go one way or the other, if it's approved or it's not approved. I think it will be challenged again. And what I don't appreciate is when the first time any project, I'm not just talking about this project, any project that comes online, they wait until the last minute and bring a letter up. You're professional, you have professional, I understand. But after the EIR, the guidelines for the EIR is published, and we have bids, we go for RFP or what have you, we award a contract, then after the EIR is done 8-9 months later, there is another criteria that was not mentioned or talked about. I think we have to put our hearts in the right place, which I'm sure there is, but I think we need to change it the way we do business and bring all the information up front so we can address it. So this won't have to go back again and back again. One way or the other, we make a decision and move forward. I believe I've been talking about creating a little historic village in some of our parks. This is a perfect candidate for it. This house can be preserved and moved into a park that everybody can see and appreciate, and we can have an adaptive reuse for it. And I don't know what the cost of this EIR was, and I'm sure it's about $80,000 to $100,000 if I'm not mistaken. And another subsequent EIR is going to cost as much. So it would have been a lot less expensive to move this house and put it somewhere that everyone can see and appreciate maybe a little bit more than where it is, and yet let the developer build a project that is good for our community, something that everybody can use. Now, if you want to talk about the design, and is this the proper time to talk about the design aspect of it, or
not?
Well,
They can, even though
Your microphone.
is it for
If I may ask Mr. Harpetian, I apologize for interruption. Like, I think he asked in the beginning, the rejection of the EIR results in the rejection of the project?
It means that you can't approve the project. So if you don't believe that the home on 128 is not historic, if you believe it is historic, then at a minimum you've got to direct staff to revise the EIR, address it as historic, and then the council could come back and say we want to approve the project with the statement of overrides. Alternatively, you could deny the project. However, you'd have to do so on the basis of design, meaning either something with the design you don't approve of. I think one example is Councilman Najarian referenced the incentive that might be a basis to deny if you don't think it's appropriate. So that's the range of options that you have. If you still want to consider the project after the environmental has been addressed appropriately in your view, if you don't feel that it's currently a proper determination, then you can direct us to come back and bring the EIR back at a later time. Does that make sense?
Made sense. Same sense as all the reports that I got today. I mean, are we? Does that mean that we can talk about the design?
Absolutely, it's part of
okay.
the. Part of the.
Now let me just address a few issues.
Yeah, let me just add. You couldn't, if you don't believe that the AR is adequate, you can't approve the design tonight. But you certainly can talk about it.
I want to make some comments because this is why a couple of weeks ago I asked for any developer to bring their stage 1 first preliminary design to the council, or tell us what is it that they want to do and get some feedback instead of designing everything all to the max and finish the project and bring it up as a stage 1, stage 2, because then we make those comments, you have to go back to the drawing boards. So I know design review did that. We went to design review and then we got comments or redesign or what have you, but I think these are much larger projects that needs comments in the beginning. I think it's up to the developers to do it for stage 1 or stage 2, but I would do it that way if I wanted to build anything. So let me address some of these issues and ask maybe a few questions from Vilya, please, if I may. The couple of questions about the common area and publicly accessible open space.
Yes.
The common area that's in the front, it's 867 feet, square feet. And it's about 6 feet wide. It's in a setback area. Does DSP allow that common area to be part of because common area is somewhere that we can use. It's usable. If it's not usable and you have all these bushes in the front, and I can tell by the renderings as well that you can't even walk on it, how can you calculate the setback area as a common area?
Yes. In this case, in the DSP, you would be able to go ahead and include the setbacks as part of your open space calculations. Landscaping is permitted in the open space, obviously, because of landscaping. It goes towards the landscaping calculations. In this particular instance, the publicly accessible open space has to be specifically devoted to for the public benefit, for the public use, and that is the area that they've chosen along the southerly property line.
I would get to that. But I don't know. I think that's something we need to look into, because if it's a common area, common open space area, and you cannot even use it and walk on it, I don't think. And is there a minimum width for it, or there is no minimum width?
There is no per se minimum width. In terms of the DSP calculations, you have to have 10% of your project site area. For multifamily residential, you have to have a 140 square foot minimum per unit. In terms of calculations, there is a minimum width for landscaping, which would be a minimum 2 foot width, 2 by 2 by 2, which would be the minimum for landscaping calculation purposes. In terms of open space, the publicly accessible open space has to have an uninterrupted 20 by 20 square foot area to be counted towards the publicly accessible open space. In this particular instance, they have provided a 20-foot wide publicly accessible open space with a 31 foot. So they've provided the minimum 20 by 20, and then unfortunately or fortunately, it continues on and narrows down to 11 feet. So it does meet the intent of the DSP publicly accessible open space.
Right, but I was referring to the common area, not the publicly accessible open space. The common area doesn't have a minimum of 10 feet?
The common, I'm going to double check right now with the code, but I don't believe so.
Let me just finish my comments. I mean, I have a lot of comments, but I don't think this is going, but that publicly accessible open space on the south side, which is 11 feet wide, after that 30 feet it gets to be 11 feet, that's part of the setback as well, so it can be in the setback.
Yes, it can.
And can they have can it be gated?
Actually, there is no setback requirement, no interior setback requirement in the East Broadway district. There is only a street front setback, which in this case is the 6-foot landscaping buffer along Kenwood. So there is no interior setback required whatsoever.
Right, but you need an interior setback if you would like to have balconies and windows or what have you. You cannot put the building on the property line and have openings in there. So therefore there is a setback. Am I correct?
Yes, that would be a building code issue. So if there were no openings, they would be able to go ahead and build a solid wall along the interior property line per the building code standards. If they do need openings, then of course they would need to meet the building code.
Right, so because of the building code, I have a setback of 11 feet on the south side, and that is considered as a common area. And I see a gate in the rendering that after that 34 feet, there is a gate that separates that front common publicly accessible open area from the rest of it. And that's what I have. And, I think there's a good intention in code to allow 1 to 10 ratio when you provide 600 square feet, for example, open space that is accessible with public, and give for the 600 square feet, we allow 1 full floor, 6,000 square foot of building, and the parkings are half tandem. I understand that they allow it, but it just squeezes everything. And I like this project for the same reasons that Mr. Khan indicated. It's family-oriented housing, it's ownership housing, it's 2 bedrooms mostly, 42 bedrooms or 38 2 bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms and maybe 4 1-bedrooms. I like this kind of a project. I want to go on the record and I mentioned that I like it, but the incentives that's there, it has to be really done well in order for the developers to use the incentives, not just a little strap of 11 foot, as Mr. Najarian indicated, and get 1 more floor because of that. And I have so many comments for the design, but I want to stop here and give my colleagues a chance to speak.
Councilmember Sinanian on the EIR.
Sure, on the EIR. I do have comments. I listened to the analysis that was presented on both sides and the analysis that my colleagues went through. And I have to say that although I believe these are not the best sort of the clear-cut examples of when something is historic and when something isn't, there is enough there for us not to take the step and approve the EIR, because it's questionable enough where it makes these bungalows indeed historic. So I agree with my colleagues on that note. I do want to make very short comments on the design. First, I want to say something. I don't understand folks, our residents, getting up here and the first thing that they cite is how long they've lived here. I try to understand what the reason, the logical reasoning, if any, behind that is, because you may have lived here for 300 years and your ancestors and whatever, but if you're not making a logical point, it's not a logical point, period. It's over. Or maybe you moved here yesterday and you get up and you make a legal or logical point, then you've made a point that's worthy of consideration more so than someone who's lived here for a long time but doesn't. So anyway, I just it's a pet peeve. I don't understand why folks cite that as if that gives them additional legitimacy. I mean, the argument is the argument. Either it's a good argument or it's a bad argument. But moving on from that, I am also concerned with the way sort of design is being gamed to show enough open space or enough green space, but when you look at it, you look at its practicality, look at its practical use, it's really not there. I mean, it's just not going to play the role which council had intended for it to play when they set out these guidelines. So I think in the future, all the projects that come in front of us need to take these considerations more seriously and design accordingly. Make sure that when we say open space or green space, public space, it's actually usable public green open space. Otherwise, it seems like it's okay, well, it's per code, so we're good. Well, not really, no. And as these buildings that were approved over the last 6 years are coming online one after the other, it's becoming more and more apparent how we haven't really looked at this issue more critically in the past, resulting in the lack of open space, the lack of public space, the lack of green space. And that's very unfortunate because, again, downtown Glendale is already built up. It's pretty dense. So, considering the realities of increasing population, increasing demand for living space, I understand why we need to develop, but it has to be responsible development. It has to compensate for that development by providing the appropriate amount of open and public space and green space. So I'm just going to limit myself to those comments.
Thank you. Thank you. So that leaves my response, and I'm not convinced that these particular homes are not historically significant. So I'm also going to vote against the EIR. Also, I agree with Mr. Najarian that I think Mr. Cole or Reverend Cole was a significant figure in our past. I think all the research that was done, I think that proved it. I think that I was really shocked. I thought it was a really inconsistent fact of how staff analyzed and rationalized the criteria too, because as Mr. Najarian said a couple of weeks ago, it was just the opposite. We had a gentleman that was not had not lived here. The house had been changed, and yet we were getting support for approving that application. So I feel this one is like far more deserving of the historic consideration. So I'm voting against the adoption of the EIR. As far as the development goes, I think the significant phrase that I heard was the public accessibility through the open space. And if you looked on slide, and I'm not going to ask you to bring it up, S10, but again, I agree with my colleagues. This, to me, does not qualify for open space at all. It's just too narrow. And plus the fact, accessible. There is a gate. It has to be open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., so that means it's going to, and in the plans it said it will be open during the daylight. Well, it had to be open from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. at night. There are apartments, residences along that walkway, and that would not, I would think, would not encourage neighbors to go and sit in that open space and read the paper or have a coffee, because they'd be looking right into someone's home or apartment. So I just felt that was a discouragement and not an encouragement. And about the architecture, and I'm terribly sorry, but I am tired, and I get emails about this all the time, I am tired of boxes that someone says is, architecturally beautiful. I think, especially in this particular area, which is a neighborhood, I think that deserves an apartment development or home ownership development that has articulation and has warmth. And, and they mentioned, where was it that you mentioned? First of all, you said it was a fairly simple design. Okay, I agreed with that. Then you said you were copying from other developments that had interesting details, and yet there were no interesting details. And so this is what I'm looking for, and I'm putting this out to everyone that's listening and that cares, is the fact that I'm looking for architecture now that has interest, that has warmth, that has integrity, that has articulation. And I'm not seeing it. I don't want our neighborhoods to look like our downtown. I just don't. I think it's okay, it's downtown, it's fine. But in my neighborhood, in your neighborhoods, I would really like to see some really beautifully developed buildings I drive through other cities, which will go unmentioned, and I see beautiful architecture. And I want that for our residents in our community. So that's all I'm going to say. And I don't want to say I'm sorry. I regret the fact that you had to go through all of this, the EIR process, and come up short. But I think we've made our decision. And do I have a motion on the?
I have a question before we take a motion. For our city manager, maybe city attorney. I'm going back to, this is only one case. We had other cases as well, that if they decided to move one of these houses because only one of them has a significance or not, but we were not convinced. If they want to move this house and place it in Verdugo Park, for example, what would be the process?
Well, we are doing the North Verdugo master plan in the coming year, in the first half of the coming year. And so what we would do is, as that process gets underway, consult the Historic Preservation Commission, consult the Community Services Commission, because the question, I think, would ultimately be, do you set these houses aside as somewhat kind of museums unto themselves, or do you try to repurpose it as the smaller kind of community center that was envisioned, a community room that was envisioned for the north end of that park? And so if that were to be the case, then we would move in that direction, and presumably you'd have the developer, the property owner rather, pay for that cost, unless the city decided that it was important enough for the city to pick up the house, move it there, make the foundation improvements, make the utility connections, and absorb that cost.
Okay. I just want to go on the record again and say that this kind of projects are needed in the city. These kind of projects that are ownership, entry-level, family-oriented are needed in the city. The projects that was built in downtown, I don't want to go and be a broken record again. It's done. It's most of them are one-bedrooms or smaller two-bedrooms. The vision was different. I think the vision has changed, and they followed our vision. And I'm sorry that you have to go through this again, because this was done once before. And if I were you, I would really look into moving one of those houses and get this project done the right way. And as far as the incentives goes, you need to work with the staff and see how can you go make it better or make it more fair and make it more usable open space, so you can use the incentives. Otherwise, I don't think we want to, I personally, I'm only one vote, but I don't want to incentivize projects that the open spaces are not usable. So, and it's not going to make a huge difference on your project, maybe 2 or 3 units, if the incentives are there or not. But I would really look into moving one of those houses and work with the staff, and I would vote for that. Put it that way. But with that.
Yeah. And I think the bottom line here is that we have to maintain the integrity of our incentives and how we look at them, and what the requirements are, and that's what I feel as well. So do I have a motion on the first item?
If I could just proceed, because the 2 items were to approve the environmental and to approve the project. Obviously, you're not doing that. So I would ask that you, and I want to be able to create a record here just for the record. So I'd ask you to direct our office to, a motion directing our office to prepare findings denying the environmental and the project. Normally, because on the environmental, what I'm hearing is that you don't agree that the project, that the structure at 128 is not historic, and so for that reason you can't certify it. In normal circumstances, if that was the only issue, then you could direct preparation of an environmental impact report that had the conclusion that it was historic, and then the council could consider whether or not to approve a statement of overrides. But to me, it sounds like you're not there because you don't approve the project either. So I'm asking for a motion to direct our staff to prepare a motion denying the environmental and denying the project for the reasons that you stated here this evening.
Okay. Do I have
Can we mention why are we denying do we have to mention why are we denying it?
Well, we'll put that in the motion, but what I hear on the environmental is obviously the conclusion of the council is that the the weight of the evidence leads you to the conclusion that the structure is historic. And then as it pertains to design, you don't approve of the incentive, the use of the incentive, as well as the other design concerns expressed by the members of the council this evening.
Julia. As Mr. Garcia just mentioned, there's essentially the non-certification or the denial of the final EIR based on the historical resources, but there are actually two properties in question. And does council wish to proceed with the historic resource assessment of both the 128, which would be for the architectural integrity of the craftsman, and 132, which would be for the Reverend Clifford Cole significance, the criterion 2 versus criterion 5?
Do you think, obviously as part of the findings that we brought back, I intended to add that as part of the findings. I don't think we should parse the historic assessments because it's one environmental review for one project, so it will take note of the fact that the other properties, while are not historic, but the ultimate conclusion will be that because 120, the council concludes that 128 is historic, you can't approve the environmental document. And that'll be part of the findings that we'll bring back before you in 2 to 3 weeks. Well, sorry, not in January.
Agreement? Motion?
And if I could throw out one other thing, since we're looking at one or both of these houses as historic, I want to remind the council that you do have the ability to vote to begin the designation process for a property, even if the owner objects. So if you did find the Clifford Cole house, for example, to be eligible, that's a process you have the ability to do now, and I just want to remind you of that.
I don't think we want to go that.
We can also put that in the report as well when we come back in January.
They own the house. I mean, I don't want to designate their house for any. It's.
So I will make a motion denying the project and denying the EIR and request that the city attorney's office come back next week with the.
Well, not next week, January.
Come back at our next meeting.
Correct.
With the
findings.
The findings for such a decision.
Second.
Question before I second it. Again, for these houses, one was occupied by the Reverend Cole, and the other one. I'm voting for that one as a historic property.
Okay. So I understood.
That's the one that I'm really because of the history of it. As far as the other one with the architectural elements, I don't know because it was not. I was not convinced, to be honest with you. So that's the only one I'm voting on to deny the EIR. So I'll second it.
Second. Roll call, please.
Council members Garpetian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Devine?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all.
Madam Mayor, which item would you like to proceed to
We're going
next?
back to action items.
8A is city attorney regarding policy direction for allowance, regulation, and for prohibition of short-term rentals. 8A1 is a motion providing direction to staff.
Hey, Mr. Ochoa.
We have.
We're trying to find our places here in our.
A rather
while
brief
they're all leaving.
report on an emerging trend that we see in the economy in general, the sharing economy, and we're seeing it by way of, in this particular case, the use of residential properties for short-term rentals. So with that, Yvette Nukian from our city attorney's office will provide you a policy overview. This is the beginning of a discussion, so no decision necessarily being asked for tonight other than direction for staff to bring you back something if you want to actually act on some of the discussion that will take place. So with that.
Good evening, Mayor Devine and members of the council. I'll keep this very brief. Short-term rentals. A short-term rental is a dwelling unit rented to a tenant for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. So we're not talking about long-term leases, very short leases, usually 1 week, 2 weeks, even a few days. There's two basic types of short-term rentals. Vacation rentals are ones where the owner of the property is not present. And home sharing is when you are present in your home when your guest is there. The major players in the short-term rental market are Airbnb, HomeAway, which is the same company or owns VRBO, and there are literally dozens of other sites. And they are commonly referred to as hosting platforms. And they have two basic ways that they make money. The broker model, which is that they charge a per booking fee as a percentage of the nightly rate. Or you can also pay a subscription fee for the privilege of listing the rental. And hosting platforms also charge the guest a service fee at varying percentages. There is unfortunately, no comprehensive state law on this subject, so each city is left to regulate individually and as they see fit. SB 539, I believe it's 539, 593, was introduced in 2015. It would have been a state law that comprehensively regulated short-term rentals, however, it failed to pass. Currently, Glendale's code, short-term rentals are not defined as a use. Hotels and motels are defined under the zoning code definitions. However, they are narrowly defined so that short-term rentals, most short-term rentals, I have to say, qualify that, do not fall under the definition of a hotel or a motel. They are not expressly defined, allowed, or prohibited, but there is a very strong argument that they are residential uses, and most residential uses are allowed in zones that allow single-family, multifamily homes. So just to go back there, the conclusion that we have come to is there's a strong likelihood that currently in Glendale, STRs, short-term rentals, are an allowed use.
In other words, if we were to say you can't have a vacation rental in Glendale, that would be probably not a winning argument because of the language that's in the code.
Thank you. Short-term rentals have existed in Glendale, admittedly, for many years, but the last 5 years has seen an explosion of them, mostly due to the fact that these websites are easily linking hosts and guests. Host Compliance is a company that mines data from all the different websites. They give us a rough estimate that there's about 450 listings citywide. Most are rented at about 50 to 90 days max per year. It is difficult for staff to get an accurate count since the listings are across many different websites, hence the reliance on this company that does it for us. Before we delve into what Council wants to do with respect to short-term rentals, it is useful to examine some positives and negatives of short-term rentals. I won't go into all of them as you can read the slide, but some of the positives are that the owner of the property does receive some income. Some travelers find it more comfortable to stay at a single-family home than a hotel. Some of the negatives are potential nuisance activities arising from the certain inconsiderate guests, loud parties, parking problems, trash, security issues, the general fear of the loss of the residential character of the neighborhood. Some affordable housing advocates have argued that short-term rentals take away from affordable housing, and the rising enforcement costs. Cities that do have stringent regulations or bans tend to be the ones that have the reports of the loud parties, the security concerns, etc. We did have one problem house in Glendale. We did enact a loud party ordinance. However, that didn't specifically target short-term rentals per se, just the activity, the nuisance activity itself. The general erosion of residential character of the neighborhood comes from the sentiment that people do not want commercial activity in where they live, in residential neighborhoods. The impact on affordable housing, this is a negative that has been argued by many affordable housing advocates, that the potential for high profits when you rent out your home short term creates such a financial incentive that the home is taken off of the long-term rental market and on the short-term rental market, and this raises rents because there's less of a supply. One policy discussion point, we could possibly examine an affordable housing nexus fee study that could be funded through the Housing Authority. The transit occupancy tax ordinance that Glendale has defines hotel broadly so that STRs are actually included in that definition. So while they're not encompassed by the zoning code definition. They are encompassed by Glendale's TOT ordinance. So currently, the law as it stands today under the TOT ordinance, short-term rental hosts are currently legally obligated to collect and remit TOTs to the city. The vast majority, however, have not done so, and there's obviously two possible reasons. One is that they don't realize that they have to do this legally, and the second is that they are actively evading it. It's pretty easy for a short-term rental to operate without anyone even knowing it exists. The city does not currently actively enforce the TOT collection. We need some direction before we do that. So the TOT is 12% currently. It's the rate. We would need to expend some resources to track down each short-term rental and actively enforce the TOT against each operator. There are dozens of websites. A lot of times, I'd say most of the time, these websites do not reveal the property address or the owner. So it takes a lot of research and sometimes bringing in outside consultants to get to the bottom of who owns this property. So the solution that some cities have come up with is they have entered into agreements with Airbnb. Airbnb seems to be the only one at the moment doing these agreements. Airbnb has agreed to voluntarily collect and remit TOT for certain localities, such as most recently Los Angeles and Santa Monica. There are many others, San Francisco also. Short of a voluntary agreement, if the city were to enact an ordinance that simply put the burden of collecting TOT onto Airbnb and other hosting platforms, we would run a risk of being sued by Airbnb. They have done this in other cities. Another, again, policy option is to direct staff to negotiate with one or more hosting platforms for the collection of TOT in Glendale. So banning short-term rentals result in some enforcement costs. Of course, gathering evidence is time-consuming. Like I mentioned before, we'd have to do a lot of research to figure out who owns this property. The difficulty of matching a listing with no address to a person, and a lot of times the hosting platforms do not cooperate with localities, citing privacy laws. Depending on the level of regulation, of course, some cities have to hire more code compliance staff or even establish whole task forces. We have learned from other cities that penalizing or criminalizing or putting the burden on the hosting platform to regulate publishing illegal sites or criminalizing publishing illegal listings will likely invite legal challenge. They have done so in San Francisco, Santa Monica, and Anaheim. They were recently dealt a blow in that their preliminary injunction application in the San Francisco lawsuit was denied. And I can go into the legal issues, but I won't do so right now. If you have questions, I can answer that. So, we're options that we're left with today, and again, this is just an opening of the discussion. We can allow one or more types of short-term rentals by zone, allow home sharing only, like Santa Monica does, or vacation rentals only, or both. You can allow it by the type of residence, multifamily, single family, and really the complexity of the regulation, it's really up to you. I mean, the sky really is the limit, but, you know, there are varying degrees. Examples of some regulations that other cities have enacted. Some have gone with the over-the-counter permit, the very simple, sort of like our business registration certificate. Some have gone with a CUP with a public hearing. Some have put limits on the number of days per year allowed to be rented. For example, San Francisco has a 60-day cap, maximum number of occupants, quiet hours, neighbor notification requirements, contact numbers for property managers, and TOT payment requirements. These are some of the basic elements that most cities have in their ordinances. Of course, there's the option to ban completely, and the reason for banning would be to, if there was strong community opposition and a lot of concerns with the negative impacts. However, the cautionary tale here is a blanket ban does impose a lot of enforcement challenges. New York City, West Hollywood, and Anaheim are just a few examples of cities that have completely banned all kinds of short-term rentals. West Hollywood did a report about 6 months into their ban, and I think it's an exhibit to your staff report, that the ban has been largely ignored and code compliance cases are time-consuming and resource-intensive. So their solution is to alter the fines to tie it to the nightly rental rate, thereby upping the fines, and of course hiring more staff to enforce this ban. Anaheim, interestingly enough, was initially enacted a permitting scheme to allow short-term rentals, and then because of community opposition decided that it was going to repeal that ordinance and ban short-term rentals entirely. They were sued by short-term rental operators, claiming that they had already gained a vested right to operate this as a business, despite the fact.
Decided? Or they were sued? Has it been decided?
No, it's in the beginning stages of the lawsuit. No worries. So here are some potential areas that the council can direct staff to do some outreach to stakeholders, further study of certain areas that you need more information on. If you want to consider giving us direction now as to banning or regulating, again, banning would be simpler to craft but may present enforcement difficulties. And again, TOT enforcement is a big one. Would you like to seek out agreements with hosting platforms? And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
So I would just note, Madam Mayor, members of council, this is before you because it's an issue that a lot of cities are having to address with us. I think the neighborhood concerns are there, but not as real as they are in some of the other cities that have had to deal with it, the Santa Monica's, the Anaheims, the West Hollywoods of the world. But we do need direction, because part of it is if we're going to allow them, then we can collect TOT and we can devise some strategies to perhaps, as Yvette noted, reach out to the Airbnbs of the world and try to get agreements with them to collect TOT. But as soon as we have, if you're inclined to allow them and then direct staff to come up with solutions, including reaching out to stakeholders, then Mr. Elliott's staff can let loose and go after the money. So that's really why we're here, because we want to know before we do that you're inclined to allow them, keep allowing them, for lack of a better term, and then just impose some additional regulations if you're inclined to do that.
Councilman Garpetian?
Yes, thank you. So based on our estimate, we have 450 listings citywide?
Yes.
And mostly they are in single-family zones or multi-family zones or commercial zone? Where are they?
Well, Host Compliance did a snapshot for us as of October 2016. So this is just a moment in time, if you will, but I think this probably reflects the trend. So single family at that time was 34%, multifamily was 51%, and they have 15% unknown. So.
And if we're going to go down this road of regulating, we actually, this company that Yvette mentioned, Host Compliance, we don't have them on retainer yet, but if we're going to go down, that might be an option so we can get a little bit more detail. The information they gave us was sort of to help us at least identify and be able to explain to the council what's going on in Glendale. So we'll have, as we go down the road, we'll have a little bit more information to provide, a little bit more detail on that question.
Okay. So I have a single family house and I want to with Airbnb, 15 to 90 days. What happened the rest of the time? They live in it, the owners live in it, or it's vacant? Do we know?
Councilmember Garpetian, I actually don't have enough research on that, but a lot of people have second homes, and they just leave it vacant.
They make enough money out of 90 days to basically pay the mortgage and the taxes and maintenance and everything else. Okay.
Possibly.
So we found out about those 450 listings through the company. Do we have any police calls or complaints? What's the number of police calls we got from these properties?
I don't have that data. I know there are a couple of houses that code enforcement has been getting complaints about with respect to just the fact that they're renting out, that they have listings on Airbnb, and that they have guests. They're operating a short-term rental in a single-family neighborhood. Other than the specific party house that I mentioned, I don't know of any other health and safety concerns that the police have reported.
There really have not been from the police perspective, except for the one in Glenwood that was addressed. Everything else has been in the realm of code enforcement and neighbor complaints. People coming and going, who are these people, that kind of stuff. Should they be doing it? Is it allowed by the code? Those types of arguments.
And I've heard knocking on the door at 2 a.m. in the morning, and where is 1400?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they're scared. Yeah.
Also, I want to, since we are talking about this short-term rentals, there are, it came to me that there are a few houses that they operate like a hostel home. And Europe has a lot of them. You sleep at night, you're out 6 in the morning and someone else replaces you. Or they put some kind of a temporary structures in their backyards that doesn't need foundation. So legally they can put a little, I don't know, one of these Home Depot storages in their backyard, and people come in and sleep in there. And they leave early in the morning. So while we're at this, I mean, maybe we should look into those as well, because I got a couple of complaints about that as well. And I think if we, as you mentioned, if we have our business registration, basically certificate process for them, if they're operating and they know that they have to get a license, and they don't, then they are in violation of law. But I think we would, if we want to go through this route of not banning it, getting a business registration license and taxing them is one of the ways that I would suggest to go. But again, I want to know if there is a huge opposition from the community or not. I wouldn't want one in my neighborhood that way, but I don't think anybody would. So I'm going to stop here and hear what my colleagues have to say.
Comments?
No comments.
Okay, well, Mr. Najarian's not here right now, so I'll make mine. First of all, this is really complicated. I'd like to know if the Airbnb contract, does that work? I mean, are the communities that use that, the cities that use that, are they happy with that setup? I mean, does it make it easier for the cities if Airbnb is involved?
In theory, it's supposed to make it easier because you're not having to go after each locator. I will tell you, it's very new. Airbnb only very recently agreed to do it with some of the cities, so we're going to be one of the first ones if we reach out.
Okay, so it'll be something we can...
Yeah, if you have an agreement that's binding and they do it, it will be easier because you don't have to go after every single operator or host, excuse me.
We would suggest that we use that with our BRCs, our business registration certificates, to double check and be able to go both sides. One of our biggest concerns would be garage conversions that were done illegally, and now they're being rented out on Airbnb. If we use the BRC, if we were to enter into an agreement and we get a registration list that says this unit is, and we look and there's no BRC, we can send them a note. If they do apply for the BRC, we can do our regular background and go, there's a garage out there that has been converted. Right. So we would, from Neighborhood Services Code Enforcement, we would strongly recommend some kind of agreement.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
To cross-check.
Well, I know the complaints I've gotten are from up in the Montrose area, and it's all garage conversions, and then they have people coming at their door at 2 a.m. in the morning, and et cetera, et cetera. This is an enforcement nightmare no matter which way we go, right? I mean, it's...
Only one way you're not getting any revenue for it, and the other one you are.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, but I agree with Mr. Garpetian and probably the rest of council. I think outreach is the most. I couldn't make this decision without knowing what the residents want to do or would like to do. If we get an outcry that they absolutely do not want to see this in Glendale, then we can maybe get direction from them. But I think that's of the utmost importance.
If your direction tonight is to tell us to go explore further, that we're at least interested in seeing how a system might work, then yes, we would outreach to the Association of Realtors, to apartment owners, to the HOAs, give it a name, just to find out, because I think generally speaking, people are going to say, no, I don't want it. And then if they stop and think a little bit, they're going to say, well, can I really, truly, even if you ban it, is it going to be banned? And maybe not. Maybe not.
And with this Airbnb component, maybe that would give us some sort of
That's right.
control.
That's right.
What are the property owners' rights legally as far as turning their single-family house or their second house or vacation house into a rental property, short-term rental property? Is it legally, they're within their rights to do this? Or?
Well, if the city were to enact a ban, our view would be the city would have the lawful authority to do that. It would be within its police power to say, in essence, we're not going to allow, if this was the ultimate argument the council made, that you don't have to allow the single-family neighborhoods or multifamily neighborhoods to be used as hotel zones or de facto hotel zones. That's the argument that the cities that are being challenged, that's their argument, that they're trying to protect the character of the residential neighborhoods, especially single-family neighborhoods. So if you made those findings, I believe they'd be upheld in court. And the only caution I throw is that it hasn't gone up to the Court of Appeal yet. There's no court that's and actually I take that back. There's one court that did decide it's okay. So I think, and the only reason I say it's still an open issue because in Anaheim and in Santa Monica they are being vigorously challenged by property owners groups in those cities, and so there's going to be litigation for those cities that impose bans. But my view is, as a city attorney, that it's within our police power to ban them if that's what the council wanted to do.
And one other question is the apartment building owners, can they lease some of their units on 6 months basis, or is that considered short-term?
30 days. Technically, it's 30 days or less.
30 days or less?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Najarian.
So, just briefly, state my position. I do not like the short-term rentals. I think it is harmful to the fabric of the community. But more importantly, it's harmful to the access to housing. There's 450 units here, and that's an estimate. Those are 450 units that are not available to residents in Glendale to rent and to live in. That drives up rents throughout the city, and it just amplifies the housing crisis that we have. So I understand there's difficulties with enforcement, but my general position is short-term rentals are a bad idea. We should try to hopefully let the other cities litigate it, and maybe we can take advantage of their early action on it.
I mean, my position is that it's just too messy, and it's going to lead to a large number of problems. I understand that even if we don't allow it, people may go ahead and do it anyway, but that's what enforcement is for, and we're going to have to learn to deal with it somehow before until there comes a point where this whole thing is more systematized and better monitored, and we have a handle on it. But I don't think at this point we can.
Well, with that, I see a 2-2. I see 2 in favor and 2 not in favor of going forward.
I'm not in favor, no. I just said, I thought we were just
okay.
discussing.
And I think all of you wanted the outreach, is what I was hearing. So if that's the direction you want to give us, do the outreach and then come back.
It's outreach. Folks are going to get nervous. Outreach with the idea that council is inclined to say, no, we are going to do an outright ban based on findings. But we want to know how you feel about it, because people are going to say, well, are you going to do it or not? Well, they're going to ask for your opinion. It sounds like there's more of a leaning towards no, an outright ban, but we would still do that outreach to see what the folks are saying.
I would probably couch in my view of it, based on discussion, is that council has concerns and wants to hear from the community first before we bring it back.
Mr. Garcetti, I will ask you, because you said that you would.
Yeah, I don't know how much clearer I could be. I said I wouldn't want one in my neighborhood. So
right. But would you be willing to go for the outreach option? Start just asking the community if they're interested.
I think I would want to wait and see what the results of the lawsuits will be in the other cities and go from there. I mean, it's so much time and effort from the staff to go outreach for something that the council has no interest in. So.
Then there is, I guess, no reason for a motion, because we are not in favor of going forward with this. at this point, at this time?
I think 6 months we'll come back, and if there's new information on the lawsuits,
All
we can provide that to you.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
Great, okay. Next item?
Madam Mayor and Council, the next item, which is listed as 8E, Director of Public Works regarding procurement of BMW i3 all-electric.
I'm sorry.
That's been...
Has been
I'm sorry.
moved.
Yes.
That's been
Moved, and
moved.
I was just simply reading into the record.
Thank you.
So people know. Thank you. 8C is Director of Finance regarding annual financial reports for the City of Glendale as of June 30th, 2016. C1 is motion accepting a comprehensive annual financial report. Motion accepting a single audit report.
It is time to close the book, so Bob has a very brief presentation on the CAFR and single audit.
I don't know, I see 3 books here.
It's your famous 5 Bs.
Here we
And be
go,
brief,
yeah.
brother, be brief.
The brief, okay, Mr. Elliott, brief.
I will be extraordinarily brief. I hope you all
Comprehensive, of course.
edition of the CAFR signed by Mr. Lorenz's Chris Shop. So, thank you.
The mic's not.
Mic is on.
Shut it off. So, yes, we bring the CAFR to you. And just a brief and kind of overview of the process in which we go through each year. Some of the challenges we have as we go through the audit. Our audit firm partner and manager are here from Vaverdink Trine Day, David Schulwalter, and he will come up towards the end of the presentation and do his required communication to you. As it's been questioned in the past, why don't we close the book sooner and get a statement out? Believe me, my staff, and they're back there, and I owe them a lot of thanks for the effort that they do each year and the endless nights that they stay to get this done. It's a very long 6 months to go through the process of closing the books, keeping in mind we have over 60 funds, which each one of those is like a separate company in terms of putting all the year-end accruals together and doing all the effort in terms of closing the books and doing putting all the grant information and going through the single audit report. It ends up running from May when we start the process all the way through the end of November, and then we bring this to you as soon as we can. We just printed last week. So it is a rather involved process. The auditors are here for many, many weeks. A team of generally 4 to 5 come out. They make their little field trips out to the different departments to test various things. They interview various staff throughout the city. They look at our internal audits that have been done and check all sorts of items in terms of the financial fairness and presentation of the CAFR. And then we end up, as I said, we get the CAFR completed. We get the opinion letter just at the end of November and get the report printed and to you as soon as we can. Just a little bit, as I do every year, kind of give an overview of how the CAFR is put together. It's a very top-down type statement. Starts off with a transmittal letter, which includes a lot of the facts and economics of the city. Phil's folks and CDD help us put that together. Lists the city officials. And keep in mind, the audience for this oftentimes is financial institutions, bond underwriters, rating companies that use this information. So very important to include all this script of what's going on in the city. Then transitions into the financial section. We have the auditor's report, and then goes into the MD&A. And for lack of a better description, the MD&A, management's discussion and analysis. It's an executive summary that gives you a story version of basically the financial highlights of what go on within the city. Has a summary of the debt and bond ratings. And then it transitions into what's known as the government-wide financial statements. That's akin to corporate accounting, where you have a consolidated financial statement. We put the whole shebang together, and it's basically broken down into two categories: business type activities and government type activities. And I'll show you the main statements for those in a second. From there, it delves a little bit deeper down into the major funds. A major fund, by definition, is a large activity within the city, and there's a formulaic way we go through and determine what a major fund is. General fund, by definition, is always a major fund. Sewer fund, electric fund, those are large operations within the city, so they qualify as such. Then we show the fiduciary funds, which in this case is the Glendale Successor Agency. And then there's pages and pages and pages of notes that explain all the subsequent information and required supplemental information. Then it has the non-major fund, which are the smaller operations in the governmental funds. And then our internal service funds, those are, if you recall, our ISD funds, our fleet fund, insurance funds that we basically set up like a business, but the only customer is ourselves. So we charge those funds back. So those are included in that section. And then we go into the statistical section where there's 21 different schedules of all sorts of information within the city. So briefly touching on the Exhibit A within the CAFR and the government-wide statements is the statement of net position. Basically, this is the top of the food chain in terms of what the city looks like, broken down into two categories, government and business-wide. And just doing the math, you can see in the far right corner our net position. That's the net assets. Used to be called net assets. Now called net position is $1.4 billion if we combined all the assets within the city. The income statement in this case is known as the statement of activities. A little backwards from a corporate speak, but basically shows the expenditures and then all our revenues, and then ends up again showing you the differences from one year to the next. Our governmental activities had, again, a net position of $846 million, and the business activities of $651 million for our net position as of the end of the year. As I mentioned, we have all this different 21 schedules in the back, broken down into these five different categories. The financial trends, revenue capacity, debt capacity, demographics, and operational information. Have all sorts of information of what the 10 years worth of financial data and revenues, net position, our debt capacity, our taxpayers, population, per capita income, and so on and so forth. And then, as part of the deliverables, we get the independent auditor's report. That's included in the CAFR. The other important document that we get is the single audit report. As you see here, that is a document that the auditors produce each year for our compliance with all our federal grants. We get tens of millions of dollars from the federal government in terms of from HUD and other agencies for the different grant programs we have. And they go through and look at those various grants and see if we are in compliance with all the reporting requirements and operational requirements for those grants. And I'm happy to say this year we had no findings or no question costs at all. And lastly, we have to incorporate all the new GASB statements, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. We've talked about this in the past, and it's not a requirement as yet, but we've talked about GASB 75. And as you'll see in the numbers within the CAFR, I only mention this one is because, as you all know, the unblending that the council did last year produced a remarkable decline in the OPEB liability. It went down from $214 million down to $21 million. And that was in preparation for this statement coming into being. So when it does kick in, all we'll have to book is the $21 million, far less impact than the $214 million. And what we've done in the past is always focus and give you a recap of the cash balances in the major groupings within the city. General fund is at $94 million, and really the only one of note here is our water fund. It is now finally back positive at $3.7 million at the end of the year. That was, if you recall, I think negative $22 million at its bottom. And it's made a comeback with the water rate increases and some of the tightening of the belt that Mr. Zern has been able to do within the water fund. So with that, Let me invite David Showalter, the partner from Vaverdink Trine-Day, to come up and do his presentation to you, and after that we'll have any comments or questions.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is David Showalter with Vaverdink Trine-Day Company. I'm the partner in charge of the audit for the city of Glendale. And I'm going to cover the reports, and then if you have any questions, I'll answer those for you. So you have a couple of reports in front of you. There's a required communications letter. I'm not sure if you have that or not. And then we have the single audit report, and then we have the opinion on the financial statements. So just as far as my required communications, what I'm required to communicate to you as far as the results of the audit is that we conducted the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. We issued our opinion to the city. And as far as the results of the audit, we didn't have any issues with the audit as far as disagreements with management or any difficulties. There was a couple of new accounting pronouncements that were implemented this year dealing with fair value measurement application and an additional pension-related standard. And the GASB has been updating the GASB 68 implementation from the prior year, and so there was an additional standard that was implemented this year. And then the fair value measurement was related to the valuation of your investments in your financial statements, some new guidance on how to value the investments. Our responsibility with respect to the audit includes also auditing management's estimates that are included in the financial statements. And so there are quite a few estimates included in the financial statements would deal with the fair value of investments, dealing with the valuation of the net pension liability. That valuation is provided by CalPERS through an actuarial report. You also have actuarial reports related to your risk management liabilities as well as your OPEB liabilities. So our responsibility with that is to review those estimates, make sure that they're reasonable in all material respects. We also have we've called out a sensitive financial disclosure as it relates to the pension plan. It's just a big number, and it's still a large amount, and so we're just pointing to the fact that number actually did increase from the prior year. And again, that's a volatile estimate that CalPERS provides. There is a disclosure in the financial statements that will show you that if CalPERS were to increase the discount rate or decrease the discount rate, what your liability would look like with that discount rate increase or decrease by 1% percentage point. And then lastly, management representation. They signed the representation letter dated November 28th, 2016. That representation letter comes back to us basically where the city takes responsibility for the financial statements. They take responsibility for what's in the financial statements and that the financial statements are free of material misstatements as it relates to error or fraud. Okay. And then the opinion. The opinion is on page 1 of the financial statements, so the thick CAFR here. On page 1 is where our audit opinion reads. Basically, the first paragraph is what we're auditing. We're auditing the city's financial statements. As Bob mentioned, there are several financial statements within the CAFR. So we're basically calling out each of those reporting units. Our opinion also discloses what management's responsibility is, and then what is the auditor's responsibility. And then page 2 at the top is where our opinion reads. That in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the government activities, the business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of the city. So essentially, it's an unmodified report or it's a clean opinion for the city. Okay? And then lastly, we have a single audit report, which is the small bound report. And on an annual basis, the city is required to have a single audit performed over its federal programs. And that's a condition of accepting the grant. You're going to once you receive that grant, you're going to be subject to an annual audit of those grants. Every year, we go through a process of selecting different programs to audit based on the federal guidelines. And for this year, the programs that we selected were the Caltrans grant and actually it was a continuum of care program that the city administers. So both of those grants were audited, and the opinion is on page 4 at the top. And again, it kind of reads very similar to the financial statement opinion. In our opinion, the city complied in all material respects with the types of compliance requirements referred to above that could have a direct material effect on each of its major federal programs. So that basically means that it's a clean report. It's an unmodified opinion. Okay? And there were no material weaknesses identified as a result of the audits, and we did not report any significant deficiencies as well. So overall, it was a clean audit. Okay? And so that really kind of concludes the presentation. Definitely want to thank management and the finance team for their hard work and helping us get the audit done in a timely manner, and so that we can obviously meet with you today. So we appreciate all their hard work. And as Bob mentioned, it does take a lot of time and effort, and they do a great job, so we appreciate that. So
It's like an enormous amount of work.
Yeah.
You mentioned the PERS information.
Yeah.
Was that in
Yes.
the financial report? That's where that is, right? I can
Yes.
find it in there. Okay.
That is, for the footnote reference is note 9.
Thank you. Okay.
How long did it take you to conduct this audit?
We started the audit at the beginning of the year, so we come out and we do an interim phase first. We spend a couple of weeks where we'll conduct interviews with various departments. We're looking at internal controls over the financial reporting process, looking at controls as it relates to the processing of cash, disbursement of funds, the billing, GWP billing, as well as a payroll cycle. So we're doing internal control testing in order to identify obviously whether there's any weaknesses in the internal control environment. We do that so that we can plan the audit to reduce some of our testing. So if we can rely on the controls of the city, then we can reduce some of our substantive work that we have to do at the final phase of the audit. So we do a 2-week interim phase sometime around May and June, and then we come back out in October, and we spend about 3 weeks out at the city conducting the final phase of the audit. So Bob has there. And then we came out during the summertime to do the audit of the single audit or the federal grants as well. So we spent a considerable amount of time out here conducting the audit that is phased in over the course of the year. So so the city is very patient with us, and we appreciate that. And they give us a place to sit, and it has a window. So that's good. And,
Did they feed you? Did they feed you?
And there's some coffee right outside the door if we need coffee. So and there's a restroom too, so that's good. So they're very helpful. We appreciate that very much. So they're very, very helpful. So we appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to our staff for the kudos that you're getting. Very good. Very nice. Any comments, Mr. Najarian?
I have a question. I'm not sure how it can be answered. What happened recently in Compton, and would this sort of audit prevent that or uncover that sort of issue?
I know that there was an embezzlement issue in Compton. I don't know the details of it, so I'd be hesitant to say what tests would catch that. Are you aware of that? Yeah, no.
Deputy City Treasurer.
Yeah.
Deputy City Treasurer. I don't know more than Mr. Ochoa just stated. So,
didn't Pasadena also have an embezzlement?
Pasadena did.
There's been and that goes back to David's comment about the controls. And I'm sure we don't win many friendship awards in our department with other departments, but part of our job is being the gatekeeper of making sure signatures are accurate. There's control in terms of which is what happened in Pasadena. They didn't keep control of the documents in terms of who had what and processed what. That's all part of the internal control structure that we strive very hard to make sure we keep all the time. And POs are issued appropriately and so on and so forth. It's kind of that cradle to grave, money going out the door, procurement, accounts payable, and all the controls over cash receipts, who handles what, how the cash drawers are counted, all that good stuff. And to our benefit, we have an internal audit section that keeps that in constant focus throughout the city. Not many cities have internal audit. So I think our control structure is very good in Glendale from that perspective.
You feel more comfortable now, Mr.
Well, I can imagine appearing at the Compton City Council or looking at their agenda, and they probably had a very similar sort of report that they passed the audit and the single item audit was passed. But that really does, and it makes me feel good that the big things are taken care of, but is there any mechanism? Is that what internal audit does? Is just sort of scours around and looks for discrepancies and
That's part
irregularities?
of it. I will tell you that in 24 years in municipal government in LA County, there are a number of cities that are toxic cities. And you hear me say it all the time. It begins with the city council and what your expectations are and what the elected officials are. If you are changing your executive management like you change your socks, you are going to have lots of problems up and down the line.
You mean city managers? Change your city? Is this a pitch for an extension?
No. Those cities that cannot have a stable set of council members, a stable set of executive managers, you will ultimately see problems manifest throughout the organization. It happened, and so your point's well taken. Bell had gone through its audit procedures and was able, with the aiding and abetting of executive management and city attorney's office, to effectively cover up that which they didn't want the council to see. But I would tell you that the council also didn't really want to see it. The council was quite willing to be asleep at the wheel. And there are a number of cities in this county and even more up and down the state that are partners in collusion to basically subvert the public interest. And you're to be commended as council members, and certainly for our staff, both the management team as well as the line operation people, that they comply wholeheartedly with the internal audit folks, as well as through some of the more rigorous processes that finance puts the departments through. So it's never perfect, but it is pretty darn good. Pound for pound, our folks, we pass those tests. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we need a motion to accept. We can take one motion for both.
Yeah.
I'll move 8C 1 and 2.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes. And the next item?
Next item at 8D is Director of Human Resources and City Manager regarding Productivity Index and Gain Share Incentive. One is a resolution of appropriation.
Joe?
On the heels of the CAFR, over the last, this will be the third year that the council has allowed us to innovate with this notion of gain share, whereby we have a cascading set of goals and objectives that are incorporated first in your goal-setting sessions as City Council, incorporated into the operational budget development and budget adoption process, and those strategic goals tie back to your City Council priorities. To the extent that we have on top of those goals the key performance indicators that are, as much as anything else, tactical measures that tell you how well we're doing. It's the number of calls we go on for the police department or the fire department, the number of potholes that are filled, the number of gallons of water that are treated and pressurized and delivered. All of those things across all of the line departments, those are effectively outputs, and those department strategic goals are outcomes. The gain share takes that information along with an assessment of how the city ends the year, predicated on the CAFR and the audit, and says if we are able to demonstrate that positive trajectory of the key performance indicators, if we are achieving not less than 75% of our department strategic goals, and if there is a surplus that is derived not from salary savings, meaning if all we did was not hire bodies, that doesn't really contribute towards productivity in getting things done. So a savings that is derived from increased revenues or from savings within departments that are not, again, salary related. If we have that surplus, those three tests are met, then that unlocks the opportunity for council to award that gain share, whereby all of our employees, full-time employees, are eligible for a maximum of 1% of the annual salary. Now, that is base salary. It's not special pays. It's not OT, and it certainly is not PERSable. It's one-time money meets a one-time expense. This year, as you know from our year-end report last month and the first quarter report, we ended the year $15.3 million to the good, both by way of budget surplus as well as from expenditure surplus as well as excess revenue. The one-time revenues that had come in by way of the triple flip cleanup and other increases just in economic activity. So we did have that good year. We did parse that information out between recurring and non-recurring revenue, as you may recall, and we're able to look at that against departmental operations. And so the 450 key performance indicators that we submitted to you last month across those 13 line departments, you saw increases, for example, in the number of arrests, but you also recognized that the productivity of those officers that we have are indeed making those arrests by way of Prop 47, AB 109, and the impacts that you're seeing in the community. So some of our key performance indicators are targets, some are thresholds that we're looking to cross, others are intelligence that we put together like a mosaic to understand how the community or how the organization is operating, serving the community. When you look at the key performance indicators, as I say, no one tells you everything, but together they are compelling. And so I think when you looked at that year-end report, you're able to see that all your departments are holding their own amid increasing pressure from the demand for service. Just as important, perhaps more important, are the department strategic goals. 144 department strategic goals across all of our line departments. And again, you have to get at least 75% attainment. And this year, I will tell you, we're at 76.41. That is lower than the last 2 years. We were high 70s. I believe the first year we were at 80. What I would tell you is that if you think back, if you recall, the number of department strategic goals predicated on what the council has said we want you to do by way of the budget, the number of goals has increased and the complexity of those goals has increased. So this isn't a sandbag kind of competition where we've just put the easy things out there and achieved them. Our reach truly is exceeding our grasp. And yet, even with that challenge, and this year's department strategic goals are even more challenging and more complex than this past year, we were still able to get to that 76.41. So with that said, I'm very pleased, I'm very proud to recommend to you that you have the capacity, you have the budget, and hopefully you'll have the desire to make a 1% award of that gain share, costing $1.34 million overall. That's over the entire organization, and a portion of that going back to the general fund of about $869,000. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions. I know Mr. Doyle is here. Certainly Mr. Elliott and I could try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Councilmember Najarian.
Mr. Cho, I don't care what you say, but I will not accept my 1% gain share, and I will put it back into the pool to go back to the other employees.
A scholar and a gentleman, sir.
I think my colleagues would join me in that.
Yeah. I didn't know we were
around
included.
the corner, and
You have
no one's in. Yeah, we're not oligarchs. Kidding. Joke.
Any other comments?
So I just want to understand this. I know we did this last year as well. So we saved, meeting our goals, we saved about $13 million.
Yes.
1% of that is 1.3. Is that how you calculate it?
No, that's when you look at the overall annual wages for all employees, including hourlies. We have 1,443 employees, 255 hourly employees. The total annual wages are what we use to calculate that 1%. So 1% of the overall wages for all employees is $1.341 million. The hourlies, because with hourlies, some work many hours, some work few hours. Many of them are seasonal employees. Some are like the rec leaders and lifeguards and what have you. So the regimen that we have is to make a $200 per hourly employee award to them. But all of your full-time, the 1443, they are eligible for the 1%.
Yeah, I did a quick calculation. It's like $840 per employee.
$877. Way to go! Wow, well, great. Look at you.
On
Yeah, the
second
budget
thought,
session,
on second
so.
thought, I do want my one. Of course, I don't get one. 800.
So by meeting, I'm asking this again one more time. Maybe it's late already, 9:30. But by meeting our goals, we saved $13.1 million this year. Is that?
It's a combination of savings and excess revenues that are coming in. So we exceeded the amount of revenue that we were going to see, some of it one time, some of it recurring. And then you also had a savings operationally, non-salary derived.
And this is not purchasable, right?
This is not purchasable.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, I think, do you want to, I just want to say that I think that we all can say comfortably that we appreciate all of the staff from the top to the bottom. I know that I think you're doing a fabulous job in the city and trying to provide the services that everyone needs, and I know that you appreciate this. And I think it's a wonderful way to support you. And also, it's Christmas, and it's the time for giving, and I think this is a great idea, and I'm glad that the city can afford to do it. So, do I have a motion for this item?
I'll move the item.
Second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Garpetian?
Yes.
Najarian? Yes. Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Devine?
Yes. Next item.
Madam Mayor, next item, which as listed on the agenda would be 9B. However, that will be continued to a later meeting. That takes us to oral.
If we could, I'm sorry, Mr. Kazaki, if we could, for now, continue the item till April 18th, 2017, without further public notice, if I get a motion for that. And it may or may not come back on that date, depending on where they are seeking a replacement site. But if I could get that motion, so for the record.
I'll move to continue it to
April 18th.
April 18th, without further notice.
Seconded.
Roll call.
Councilmembers Garpetian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Devine?
Yes. And next item.
Next item is oral communications. There are no cards
No
for this
cards.
portion.
Wow.
It's the first time or second time?
Wow.
Carry us over into,
This has happened twice now since I've been mayor. I think that there have been no.
that would carry
there's
us
no
over
oral-
into new business.
Sorry, new business. One item.
Madam Mayor, I move that pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.1 and Article 8, Section 1 of the City Charter, the Council hereby approves the City Attorney's appointment of David Leitenberg as Deputy City Attorney for the City of Glendale, and further that a written copy of this motion be transcribed, certified, and delivered by the City Clerk to the Office of the Civil Service Commission of the City of Glendale as and for the written statement required by Article 24, Section 5, Subsection 2 of the Charter.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Garpetian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor Devine?
Yes, and before we adjourn, I'd like to wish everyone a happy holiday, safe, and a healthy new year. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, we are adjourned.